I'd like to welcome everyone who are in attendance here and watching at home. Welcome you to the April 15th, 2015 meeting of the City of Lake Forest Plan Commission. I am Mike Lay, the chairman of the commission, and at this time I'd like to introduce the members of the commission who are here on this particular item. To my far left is Commissioner Cushman. To my immediate left, Commissioner Karras, and then to my right, Commissioner Tim Henry. On this item, for those of you who have been following it, we have two members, Commissioners Berg and Culbertson, who have recused themselves from this issue, either because of either a real or a perceived conflict of interest. So they have recused themselves on this item. So they will not be here on this item. However, they will be here in attendance on the second item on our agenda dealing with the Laurel Avenue project. From city staff this evening is Kathy Zerniak, the Director of Community Development. And so we will proceed according to the agenda. Our first item on the agenda is the matter of the review and recommendation on a revised plan for the Emberley Woods commercial development. The consideration of a revised plan is in response to the conditions of approval that the Plan Commission and the City Council both have already approved. However, there's a revised site plan of the previously considered request for approval of amendments to the existing special use permit on the property. The parcel is located in the southeast corner of Route 60 and Saunders Road. I want to emphasize that our main objective on this item this evening is threefold. Number one, to continue to inform the public as to the facts of the proposed development, especially as it's been revised by a new development team. Same property owner, but there's a different development team. Second of all, to hear comments on how and whether the conditions of the revised development plan either meet or do not meet the conditions that the Plan Commission and the City Council both agreed ought to be placed on the particular property. So along the lines, this is not a de novo consideration. In other words, we're not going back to the beginning on this project. We're looking at it from the point of the conditional approval that we gave it several meetings ago. And then the third thing I would say that depending on the public comments and the discussion of the commission, then we will decide tonight either to approve it, continue it, or disapprove it. I would expect one of those three actions by the commission this evening. So with that, Kathy, did you want to have any other further introductory comment on this?
I don't think so at this point.
Okay, very good. Well then, I would like to ask the contract purchaser, Pine Tree Commercial Realty LLC, to make a presentation. I'm not sure who is slated to make that presentation. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Peter Borzak with Pine Tree Commercial Realty. Chairman Lay and members of the commission, appreciate your time in considering this matter, and happy to be here to present this to you today. Pine Tree is based in Northbrook, not too far from here, but when we started our company 20 years ago, we were at the corner of Waukegan and Sherwood, and we spent 12 years in Lake Bluff, and so know this area extremely well. I've lived in the North Shore my entire life, and so I'm very familiar with the area, and we're excited to be involved in this project. The reason that we're back here today and the reason that we're able to make some of the changes that you're going to see is that the development team has changed a little bit. So the original developer, Shiner Capital, is still part of the team, but Pine Tree Commercial Realty, together with Inland Real Estate Corporation, a publicly traded REIT based in Oak Brook, Illinois, have been added to the development team. And the key difference now versus the team before is that Inland Real Estate Corporation is a long-term owner of real estate. They have one of the largest collections of grocery-anchored shopping centers in the country. Most of their property is based in the Midwest. And what they're providing here is a long-term strategy for this asset that allows us to develop it at a lower return. And that has allowed us to eliminate some of the square footage, scale back to development, and still make this economically feasible. That wasn't possible before when there was just a single developer. So we want to make sure that that's clear. The Pine Tree Inland team has got a relationship that goes back just about 20 years. Inland has acquired several shopping centers that Pine Tree has developed over the years. And in 2007, we formed a development joint venture with Inland and have developed several projects together with them. And in the last couple of years have also developed several shopping centers with outside developers as part of a team similar to this project with Shiner Capital. The major issues that we want to address tonight, number one, the setbacks. It's been clear from the past meetings and from the conversations we've had that the setbacks on Route 60 were a very contentious issue. We understand that the original corridor plan provided for a 150-foot setback, and we understand that the last development plan showed a 60-foot setback. We're proposing that we go back to the 150-foot setback that was originally proposed as part of the corridor plan. That will hopefully eliminate that issue completely. The second thing is that the density has been reduced. We've reduced the square footage. We've reduced the number of buildings. We've also taken away all of the buildings along Route 60. In particular, there was a bank building that was not only close to Route 60, but also encroached on the setback on the east property line. That building has been eliminated. And last, we've increased the tree canopy and the landscaping, and we think that this new plan is more in keeping with the original vision for the property and is going to be a better land use for the neighbors as well. So with that, we'd like to walk you through this is a little slow to load. I'm not sure. I'm not sure why we're having a technical problem here.
Kathy went after a technical
Okay,
person.
I can also plug my computer into it. Oh, I do. Oh, I don't. I'll have to. I don't.
Definitely the most important man in the room right now.
Right. We've all been there, haven't we?
Yeah.
It doesn't have all the images, so the images I'm showing loaded onto this. Really? Yeah. Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I don't know what else to tell you.
It's crazy. Sitting inside the engineering and stormwater, it's crazy that we're gonna still object.
Get on paper? That's fine.
But people are going to object with the trees.
Yeah.
They're going to object because while they're working on this technical matter, I would ask whether or not there's any members of the commission have had any ex-parte contacts or conflict of interest on this matter. Okay, seeing none, we've got that in the record.
It's doing the same thing with that. Yeah. One by one.
Right. It's not, this is the area again, and again.
Yeah, I'm driving out there.
You want me to- Yeah, this ain't the way the slides are built.
That's all of it?
I'm gonna. Can we start it? You emailed it to me, and grab it, bring it back.
Okay. Okay. You can use this. That's,
Where's the original plan?
that, it's all, the way he built this slide, this presentation. The way he built the presentation for this.
Really?
Yeah. So you've got that.
You want to start with the hard copies while he's trying to...
We don't really have a good hard copy here, unfortunately. Yeah.
Unfortunately.
It's an old software jacket. I feel that pain. The black screen of death, we used to call it.
We've all been there, no matter how many times you rehearse.
It doesn't seem like it's a resolution because there's so much, it comes up.
What does this say? We can do the outlet structures, that outlot structure.
No, it has to do with
The drainage.
Okay. I'll show you. Specifically, in this
Yeah, right.
back here, it talks about
Yeah, that, right. It was a concern of ours.
yeah.
I didn't get a chance to read it.
You should be okay. Gotta keep it protected. That's it, right? Okay, there you go. Looks a little better. Thank you.
Apologize for that. We're real estate people, we're not technical people. This is the original site plan. As you can see, there are 5 buildings on the plan, considerably more density, and the property development is pushed much farther on all of the property lines. This is the new plan. As you can see, much less dense. Originally 5 buildings. We now have reduced that to 3 buildings. We also have reduced the square footage by 10% of the GLA to 62,793 feet, a reduction of 6,697 square feet. The most contentious issue, as I mentioned, was a 42-foot setback from the property line to the parking area and a 60-foot setback from the property line to the building. We're now at 100 feet for the parking area and 150 feet for the closest building. And I'd like to just point out that the original Plan Commission recommendation was for 75 feet for the building, and I believe 50 feet for the, 75 feet for the parking and 100 feet for the building. So we've exceeded the original recommendation by the Plan Commission by 50 feet for the building and 25 feet for the parking. The rear elevation originally was going to have 22 feet from the property line to the service drive, 47 feet to the rear portion of the building. We now have 50 feet to the rear portion of the building, and the service drive is now curved, and the setback will range from 14 to 60 feet along that southern elevation. On the west elevation on Saunders Road, there was originally a 5-foot setback from building pad 2 and a 19-foot setback to the parking area for building pad 1. We've now increased that to 10 feet for the building pad 2, and the setback to building pad 1 parking area is now 10 feet. On the east setback, on the northern portion of the site, there was originally a 16-foot setback. That setback is now 37 feet. And on the southern portion of the east property line, the setback was originally proposed to be 10 feet. That's now proposed to be 25 feet. Note also that the original plan had parking stalls along the service drive with direct access, which would have allowed vehicles to be backing up into the service drive, which would have caused some traffic congestion. We've now added a landscape island on the outside of that parking tree to improve traffic flow and keep that service drive flowing freely. We're proposing, in keeping with the last recommendation, that there would be a restricted access gate with a turnaround that would be accessible for drivers approaching from Amberley Court. That gate would be only accessible with a fob key that would be provided to residents of Amberley Court in the new homes that would be built, as well as in the neighboring condominium. That's a private street right now. It's anticipated that that would also be used by construction traffic during the construction of homes. But also want to point out that we've provided for a cul-de-sac in the event that after completion of those homes, the city determines that the gate is not functional. So this cul-de-sac is not our preference. We lose a little bit of parking here, but it's being accommodated entirely on land that we own, and so this is something that would be an option somewhere down the road. We also want to highlight that we've enhanced the landscaping and the tree preservation pretty much all over the site, including 2 dedicated tree canopies along Route 60 that would allow trees to grow on Route 60 and keep foliage along that route, but also, very importantly for a retail development, we've preserved view corridors by concentrating those trees in certain areas. So this is an important consideration here, that we can keep the tree canopy more lush than it was originally proposed, but also keep view corridors from Route 60 for the benefit of the retailers. The last consideration is signage. We're proposing that we have one freestanding sign along Route 60. We've created a building envelope, and we would work with the city to decide where the placement of that sign would be. That sign would be designed in keeping with the standards for that strip and with this zoning. We've also got a directional sign close to the right-in, right-out access off of Route 60. And in addition, we have another directional sign on the west entrance off of Saunders. Those are all of the conditions that were suggested and that we've addressed. And so happy to answer questions if you've got any.
Thank you, Chairman Lay. Just as a little background, in July of last year, the City Council heard a recommendation from the Plan Commission in support of this project with a number of recommendations, a number of conditions of approval. The City Council made it clear that they supported commercial development of this site. Just a reminder that this site, as it sits today, is approved for development with office buildings. So it is a site that we already know would have significant tree loss, significant impervious surface. Since July, the developer who was at the forefront of this petition at that time indicated that there was not interest in presenting a revised site plan in response to the conditions. Since that time, the city has been in contact with the property owner. Several months ago, we're put in contact with Pine Tree, and as a result, you do have a revised plan in front of you tonight. Since you already forwarded a recommendation to the City Council could have in fact simply kept this petition at their level, but they felt that review of the site plan, because it is a land use issue, was important to be done by the Plan Commission. So they are forwarding this to you with the request that you review the conditions you previously recommended and evaluate whether this plan satisfies those conditions to a satisfactory level. Staff has done an analysis of this, both from a planning perspective. The city engineer and the engineering supervisor, Dan Strand and Bob Ells, are both here this evening. They have also reviewed the plan and are prepared to speak. You do have in your staff report a review of each condition of approval. I won't speak to each of those at this point. Be happy to answer any questions. But importantly, as Mr. Borzak said, the response with respect to the setbacks is significant on all sides of the property. There is less square footage. There is less intensity of development on the site. There are some water features that have been added along Route 60. Although they don't significantly alter the drainage pattern, it does allow for some detention of water on site. There's a bioswale to help deal with some water quality issues, so that too was in response to previous comments. You do have two additional conditions that were added. Again, Mr. Borzak spoke to both of those. It is reasonable, and in fact, the Plan Commission and City Council both acknowledge that some views into this site as a commercial development are important. So this plan goes a bit further, identifies areas where tree canopies will either be preserved if there are a couple significant trees in those areas that can be preserved, or will be restored over time. The city arborist, if this moves forward, will be working with the development team to identify those trees that are of significant species, are of appropriate health, and work with the plan in a way that they could be preserved. You also heard mention of the signage. The Route 60 corridor is bordered on the north side and a portion of the south side by the office research districts. Those districts provide for a monument sign, and it is recommended that those very same size requirements, material requirements would be applicable to this property in keeping with the Route 60 corridor. You do have a recommendation for approval, a recommendation to make a recommendation to the City Council with findings that the revised site plan does meet the conditions you previously forwarded to the City Council. I would be happy to answer any questions, and again, engineering staff is here tonight too to respond to any questions you might have. Thank you.
Questions or requests for clarification from the commissioners to either the petitioner or staff?
I have none. I've got a couple questions. And they're more points of clarity than anything. There's no adjustment to the height specifications that were set forth in the earlier approvals to the buildings?
No.
Okay. And the same is true with tree removals, lighting, XL, decel lanes, and all the rest of those other conditions?
Yes, most of those are unchanged. There are fewer trees that are being destroyed than from the last plan.
Okay, so you've improved.
Yes, there's more tree preservation on this plan than there was in the previous plan.
Okay, that's all I have.
I just have one clarification question for Kathy. We're talking about this, the setback on the east side, we contemplated maybe changing it at the expense of the west side and possibly considering encroachment on Saunders Road? I'm not sure I understood what,
No, in an earlier version presented by Pine Tree, I may be wrong, but I think they looked at a 15-foot or 20-foot setback from Saunders Road. We encouraged them to perhaps be less, achieve less of a setback on the west side and give a little bit more space on the east side, particularly in the area where the existing condo building is located.
right, and then that change was made from 15 to
Correct.
10?
Correct.
Okay, that wasn't clear on that.
I neglected to make one point, if I might. The Building Review Board will see this project. I think at this point, what we've heard is that the developer really wants some assurance from the Plan Commission and then from the City Council that there's support for the project, and the site plan is revised. And then they will go back, detail the landscaping, detail the lighting, detail the architectural aspects of the project. But it's reasonable and it's not unusual for the site plan piece of this to move forward.
So then just to clarify, so the new setback on the east side across from building pad 1 has been increased or decreased on the west side from 15 to 10?
From our original plan, but it's
Your
been
original
increased from 5 to 10 from the developer's original plan from last summer, correct?
Understood, thanks.
Correct.
Thank you, okay.
That's it? Okay. I have a question pertaining to drainage, and it was raised by the GHA report on pages 2 and 3, and then it was reinforced in the, it was just given to us before the meeting, but I had a chance to scan it, and that is I'm sorry? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Thank you. Let me go back. The GHA report talks about some sort of a mix-up that occurred, and I didn't fully understand it in terms of what the real problem is, but it was then even hammered home even more clearly by a 7-page submission by the Stonebridge Homeowners Association in terms of pending lawsuit. I don't want to get into the legal aspects of it, but focus instead on the engineering aspects. Can either you or the city attorney or somebody explain in layman's terms what is going on there and how, if the project goes forward, we aren't going to be left with a real knotty problem to solve?
Sure. I'm Dan Strand with Gaywalt Hamilton. Good evening. My report, to try and summarize a little bit of background in terms of what the Watershed Development Ordinance requires. As I'm sure you're all familiar with, development over a certain threshold requires detention. And those detention requirements are based on the area of the property that's being developed. And occasionally that leaves the question of what if there are areas outside of the site that flow into the site that's being developed. And so how the Watershed Development Ordinance handles that is what they call on-stream detention. And so there's a calculation that's done based on what's being done on the site, and the detention volume is sized based on what's on the site. After that, a consideration is given to how much area is draining into the site from elsewhere. And there's a detention volume safety factor that's added, so the volume of detention is increased by a certain percentage. And then the restrictor is increased in size based on the amount of area coming off from the offsite area. So that condition was present in both Amberley, the original Amberley Woods subdivision, and the Stonebridge subdivision. With the Amberley Woods subdivision, that offsite area was overestimated. Based on the stormwater report that was provided to us, that offsite area was estimated at about 58 acres. Using the technology that's available today, it looks like it's more like 8 or 9 acres that flows into the site. And as a result of that, the restrictor in the Amberley Woods pond was oversized too large.
In other words, holding back more or less water?
So it was made too large, so it was holding back less water than it
All
would
right,
be required
okay.
to. Conversely, the downstream pond in Stonebridge, that offsite area was not added to the model at all. So that restrictor was undersized. So that restrictor would need, to be made larger based on the offsite area. The Amberley Woods area subdivision restrictor would need to be made smaller based on the offsite area.
So it's made smaller, that would restrict the flow into the Stonebridge Pond?
Right, holding back more water.
Okay, okay. So from an engineering standpoint, would the reconfiguration and the revision of the plan, would that mean less likelihood of drainage issues and problems and contested cases down the road than, let's say, the previous one that we gave approval to? By that, in other words, for this site plan?
Right, for the Amberley Woods subdivision pond, if the restrictor is made smaller in accordance with the actual offsite area that's coming, that would cause less water to be discharged downstream.
Downstream, you mean?
Downstream into Stonebridge.
Okay.
Into the Stonebridge pond, yes.
Okay, because I was, again, not being an engineer and not being an attorney, the 7-page, have you seen the 7-page communication from the homeowners association?
I think so. I saw two separate documents. One of them had several points on the engineering.
Yeah.
I believe we're
It was-
talking about the same documents.
It doesn't have a date on it, but it's just for the April 15th hearing. So,
Right.
do you care to make any comment on it?
Well, the one that I looked at that contained the six, they outlined six objections or concerns with the engineering. Items 4 and 5 in that letter. Those are the two topics that I just spoke to.
Okay.
The size of the offsite area. There were some other topics that were in there. I don't necessarily agree with all of those. But the numbers 4 and 5 are pertinent to this
Okay.
application.
All right.
And Chairman Lay, at the recommendation of the city engineer, I did pass out earlier a suggested additional condition of approval that requires the reconfiguration of the outlet structures at both the Amberley Wood and Stonebridge ponds to the satisfaction of the city engineer to address that very issue.
Okay. Thank you. We should consider that if we get to the point of looking at the conditions. Okay. Okay. Any further questions? Okay. Next, I would like to go to public comment on the revised petition. I have 5 registration slips. Let me have a show of hands of those who would like to testify. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 6. Please, why don't all of you stand up, whether even those who have not submitted a slip yet. Do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you're about to give or have previously given is true and correct to the best of your knowledge? Thank you. Okay, the first registrant is Keith Krebs, 1815 Amberley Court, and to be followed by Dr. Landsman.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to thank you and the City Council for continuing to work this through, because I am one of the 2 existing courtyard homeowners, and we're in favor of development as long as it's done right. And I think the process here worked last time around because there's been some significant improvements to the plan. But I just would urge you to keep an eye out on the water issues, because we do have water issues on the Amberley Woods side of Conway Farms Road as well. So those are going to be very important. And then the issue of the cul-de-sac versus the gate. We've made a lot of improvements from when we started a year and a half ago or 2 years ago or whenever that was, because we have a hard barrier in place and in the proposal. But I just have a significant preference for a cul-de-sac as opposed to a gate. Again, I think a gate looks pretty short-sighted, kind of looks cheap and controlling. It doesn't really look like Lake Forest, and I think the image that we want to create. I think there's going to be a lot of maintenance issues with gates. They need to repair, they get damaged, they get vandalized. Those kinds of things happen to them. And I just think a cul-de-sac will look much better. And I think there's some people in the condo building, existing condo owners, that appear to be in favor of a gate and having access, but I think they're just used to looking at the situation the way it is now, where they can zip right in off the tollway and unrestricted go through there, and there's no homes in there, so they can just motor right through Amberley Woods Court and Amberley Court, and they do. But if you think about the additional traffic that's going to be at that intersection many parts of the day between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., and then you look at the time it's going to take to open a gate. At least prior drawings, we didn't see any renditions of the proposed gate, but it was a slider gate. Those don't open immediately. And then a condo owner would have to go past 22 new courtyard homes at a proposed speed, at least according to Kelman Associates in some initial study they did, proposing like a 15 to 20 mile an hour speed limit on Amberley Court. I think by the time a condo owner pulls in there and waits for the gate to open up and goes slowly past 22 homes, that it's going to be quicker for them just to go down to Conway Farms Road anyway. So I don't see any advantage at all of having a gate that would make it meaningful to address the unsightliness of it as well as the maintenance issues with it. So I would just urge you to continue to keep that requirement for a hard barrier and really to consider the cul-de-sac, which had at least previously been the recommendation of the city planning department. I don't know what their point of view on that is now, but I think it would be a much better solution as opposed to a gate. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Following Dr. Landsman will be Dave Burgess.
Hi again.
Good evening.
I'm glad to hear about the two new conditions that you're going to add on our approval of this subdivision, but Dan indicated there are other issues that have never been addressed to the board or anywhere. I already prepared my speech based on not knowing the two conditions, so you'll have to forgive. I'm just referring to his original memorandum, the technical memorandum, which is included in here, okay?
Okay.
I didn't know about the new conditions until a minute ago, but those are good.
So you've seen the staff report?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's what I want to talk about, and Dan's memo. He simplified it very much to you with what he said. But anyway, given the fact that the city staff is recommending that the revised plan be accepted as is, and the fact that they state that the Stonebridge drainage issues will be satisfied as part of the final approval process, leaves us very concerned, other people in Stonebridge. This is because we have learned from experience with the city staff that the drainage issues will not be satisfied unless resolved beforehand. The original drainage issues from the original Amberley Woods subdivision have not been resolved since we've moved in. It's about 10 years already. For example, we have been telling the city staff since initial Amberley Woods construction that our ponds were not designed for Amberley Woods stormwater, and that the Amberley Woods ponds were not designed according to Lake County ordinances, which is what Dan sort of tried to tell you in a roundabout way. It wasn't until after we filed an FOA request and discovered there is nothing in the city records that justifies statements made by the city staff and prior testimony of before you and the city council, that the city requested a review of some of the pond issues by the city's consulting engineers. That's Dan. Surprise! He agreed with us on 2 issues they reviewed. Our ponds were not designed for Amberley Woods stormwater, never were, never have been. And that's according to code. You can make the restrictor hole as small as you want. We're still within code. Amberley Woods is out of code. It's like if you have a speeding, like if there's a speed limit on a highway, 50 miles an hour, you can go 40. It's the same here. There's a requirement to make the restrictor hole so big, but if you want to make it smaller, that's okay. And our engineer just designed our ponds for Stonebridge. Amberley Woods was just a daydream for somebody, so he didn't worry about the water coming in from Amberley Woods. Okay, surprise. They agreed with us on the 2 issues they reviewed. Our ponds were not designed for Amberley with stormwater, and 2, the Amberley ponds are not designed according to Lake County ordinances. He made it sound a little more simpler, but they do not meet Lake County ordinances. Another example I like to talk about is in the original Whole Foods Plan Commission report to the City Council in July of last year. It states that the city staff asked, I would just throw in at our request, that the developer consider connecting their storm sewer outlet directly to the Route 60 storm sewer, thereby bypassing our ponds completely. Their engineers, the same ones who did not design the stormwater ponds correctly in the first place, stated there is not sufficient capacity in the Route 60 storm sewer to allow a direct connection. That's a quote. Your own consulting engineers, Dan, finally came to realize that the Amberley Woods offsite drainage tributary area of one place he said 66 acres, he just said 58 acres, used in their calculations was a mistake. And the reality is 8.7 acres. I know you guys aren't technical, but if you can visualize 66 acres of water, the hole was designed for 66 acres, the restrictor hole coming into us. In reality, it's only 8 acres. It's roughly an eighth the size it could be. They have a huge hole, which is in reality no restrictor. We've been getting water for 10 years and our ponds rise up and our hole is small. It wasn't designed for all that water, which is what we've been telling the city for 10 years. With the current acreage used in the new runoff calculations, there will be sufficient capacity for a direct connection to the Route 60 storm sewer, thereby bypassing us completely and getting us out of the loop. And thank you very much. Do you have any questions?
Not at this point. Thank you. Mr. Burgess? And following him will be Rami Lopat.
Good evening, Chairman Lay, committee members, Kathy. Nice to be here again. I just have a formal statement from Stonebridge at Conway Farms Homeowners Association. I'm on the board, and I represent the 84 member homeowners as such. So I'd just like to read you a little formal statement. And it's a little redundant to what you've already brought up, just a shade here and there. One thing you should know, however, there are some relevant facts to which we wish to direct your attention. One in particular is that Stonebridge has filed a lawsuit seeking to void entirely the easement by which Amberley Woods stormwater is directed into Stonebridge's stormwater system. That lawsuit is currently pending in Lake County, just so you know. Another item is that the petitioner, Pine Tree, has retained the same civil engineers used in last year's petition, and the notice of hearing, the notice for this evening's session, treats the petition as a, quote, revised plan. The Plan Commission may be tempted to treat the current petition as a replication or continuation of last year's petition regarding stormwater management issues. We urge the Commission not to do so. The reasons being that last year's city staff report to the Commission contains material misstatements of fact, and the report also omits relevant information that should have been part of the record upon which the Commission made its decisions. These deficiencies became apparent from a Freedom of Information Act request by Stonebridge that we filed with the city. You have our written supplemental statement that you've already referred to this evening. Thank you for looking at it regarding the above-mentioned deficiencies. Please note, however, that the technical determinations on drainage from Gawalt and Hamilton addresses only 2 of the 5 deficiencies that we bring up. And in doing so, they implicitly suggest that the drainage issues be considered from scratch. These issues should be resolved before the final approval process takes place. Insofar as the present petition is concerned, much is made in the notice of hearing that in fact we have here tonight regarding on-site detention ponds. It may be a slight improvement from the previous proposal, which we will grant, but it makes no provision for a real detention pond. And after reviewing the detailed drawings, the proposed detention ponds, the small strip along Route 60, do not receive any water at all from the proposed parking lot. The ponds might be better characterized as decorative rather than detention. As presented in the city staff evaluation document, which is before the Plan Commission tonight, a couple of important facts are missing. First, what will the material surface of the parking lot be? I'm guessing it might be asphalt. I'm not sure. There was some brick in last year's proposal, if I recall. And second, how will hydrocarbons from the parking lot be treated as required by Lake County ordinance? A 70% hydrocarbon removal rate for all parking lots of 25 spaces or more is required by law here in Lake County. We think the question of compliance in this area should not be circumvented. Lastly, the question remains as to whether or not the petitioner's stormwater drainage proposal has been evaluated by the city's own designated certified enforcement officers and found to be in compliance with the city's own watershed development ordinance as required by that ordinance. The staff report does not say. We respectfully urge you to read our detailed statement, which I believe you have. Thank you. And for the record, it contains specific information on our stormwater management issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess.
You bet.
Following Ms. Lopat will be Jan Gibson.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you. My name is Rami Lopat. On Monday, I submitted written comments and recommendations on virtually every condition. I hope you will seriously consider my questions and my points down to the details, such as not using the tree removal dollars on simply the median, and but throughout the Route 60 corridor, and certainly not to reconstruct the median. The details of your conditions matter. According to what City Attorney Filippini told the City Council, this revised petition must still go to the HPC, the BRB, and the ZBA. But Pine Tree is a new petitioner, and hopefully it is a better listener than the former petitioner. I want to enlist the Plan Commission's help in telling landowner Mike Supera and Pine Tree to save all those other commissions and the public a lot of time, energy, and angst by starting to improve this plan to a much greater degree. The developer should not wait for BRB and the HPC. The plan must showcase outstanding architecture, incorporate the reuse of the Miller Historic House, and it must create the most gorgeously native, sustainable, and stormwater retentive landscape ever. Whatever you do tonight, I hope you will accompany your action with a loud and clear message that this project, which in my opinion should never have gotten out of the starting gate, must be of national significance. It should set a new bar for shopping centers, just like Market Square once did. Why? Because Route 60 is our greenway, and this location on Route 60 is our gateway. For its part, Whole Foods should know by now that its Lake Forest customers want to believe their mantra. Whole Foods website states that businesses should harness material resources without devaluating the planet's ecosystems. Companies should be held accountable for their actions. Well, then Whole Foods should have been in this room all this time, not advertising its product selections like it did, but showing Lake Forest how it will innovate with design and site planning solutions to preserve this significant landscape, this landmarked house, and this major regional thoroughfare. That's what our comprehensive plan and the zoning code for this transitional district demand. Whole Foods needs to step up to this challenge. Indeed, the zoning code calls for you to have a higher than normal standard for the 6 special uses, none of them retail shopping centers, that are allowed in this district. The code says, quote, in the transitional district, special use permits, demolition of structures, and subdivisions of land are of special concern to the city of Lake Forest and its citizens, thereby necessitating special standards and procedures for review and approval. To be eligible for approval, special uses in the transitional district must be compatible with the character of Lake Forest, the ambiance of the district, the preservation of architecturally significant homes and estates, and protect significant parts of the landscape heritage of Lake Forest, such as floodplains, woodlands, open space. Innovative design and site planning solutions are encouraged to achieve these purposes. That's what the zoning chapter states. I, for one, am not convinced that these standards have been met. The truth, in my opinion, is that without strong direction to this petitioner to step up its game beginning tonight, this special use will negatively impact the character of the transitional district. It will rob the district of its ambiance. The natural features in the property will be destroyed more than necessary unless Whole Foods and its landlord change direction and do a better job. I'd love to hear the plan commissioners speak up tonight to say that this petitioner has an opportunity and should serve as a model. Let this petitioner know that you expect a higher standard than this revised plan or your conditions indicate. Lake Foresters want to believe their zoning code works. We want to know that this developer on Whole Foods takes us seriously, and they can do so by undertaking innovations and site planning solutions that will, in fact, preserve the ambiance, character, and landscape of this important district, this greenway, our gateway on Route 60. Thank you.
Thank you. Others? Jan?
Jan Gibson, 59 East Franklin Place. I wrote down, this is the gateway to Lake Forest, or at least one of them. I endorse the 150-foot setback, and I like the idea of the cul-de-sac as opposed to another gate. This conveys the bucolic natural green space and ambience of Lake Forest. It should be a model of sustainability with no grass in the setback, basically retention, just natural vegetation. Shame on all of us for allowing that Miller house to be destroyed. It's an early 20s house. It's solidly built. At the very least, it should be moved, or should have been moved, or should be moved to a corner of the property and adaptively reused, such as a restaurant. We have the wonderful Deer Path Inn, very much in the same vein as this particular building, which actually is a large building on the property, and Deer Path Inn is very popular. I think Pine Tree LLC is a good name as it denotes a natural area. So I'd like to see that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment? Please come up. Please state your name and address, please. Each of you who are yet to testify.
Roger Moore, 927 Barclay Circle. I'm not sure whether you saw the email that I sent to Kathy on behalf of 3 former city council members, namely Jerry Henry, Gail Hodges, and myself, who spoke at your last meeting with objections to the previous plan. We discussed the revised plan that was submitted and feel it's a great improvement over what was submitted previously. And we're looking at this from 40,000 feet and trying to address what I think are the key issues not getting into the kind of detail that's been mentioned here previously, because I like to give the Plan Commission credit for addressing issues like that or referring them to another board where they may be more appropriately addressed. The key issues, of course, are the setback, the number of buildings, both of which have been improved considerably. We made two suggestions. One, to ask that you consider looking at the parking, which is a pure grid arrangement, to see if it might be possible to have some islands that preserve some of the key trees instead of a grid arrangement exclusively. And secondly, the historic home that's there right now, I did not see any reference to it in the plan, but it's an issue that has to be addressed. If the plan is to remove that home, I think it's incumbent upon the developer to state a case of why it should be done and a justification for it. You'll recall that the previous developer commissioned someone to look at that to see if it could be saved, and the conclusion was yes, it could be. Now, I think the developer, the current developer, should be asked to address that in a rather specific way if they do in fact plan to remove that home. But we, and namely Jerry Henry, Gail Hodges, and yours truly, would compliment the Plan Commission on sticking to the standards of Lake Forest, and I think the revised plan is a good example of what happens when we stay with our standards rather than, let's say, I hate to use the word giving in, but we know that all developers, to maximize the return on their investment, try to get as much into a development as they can. And I think what's happened here is a demonstration of how that there's a lot of flexibility there and changes can be made to accommodate the city rather than the developer. So thank you for what you've done.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Anyone else wish to comment here this evening? Yes, sir.
Well, my name is Ross Greco, 1800 Everly. In regards to the project itself, Whole Foods, a lot of traffic is going to be generated, a lot of deliveries, weekends especially. So my vote is for against the whole thing. There's too little of a land and too much is trying to get in there, especially a retail grocery store such as Whole Foods. They're gonna draw lunch crowds, dinner crowds. Weekends will be busy. There'll be a lot of traffic. They get many, many deliveries. So based on that, and then the other thing is that there's so many retail stores in Lake Forest struggling. So Sunset Foods on Waukegan Road, been there forever. They're going to take a hit. So as far as generating tax dollars, I think you're going to take it from Peter to pay Paul. But that's about it. I think it's just too much and too little of a land. It's going to create a lot of congestion, and that's not what this town is about. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone else? Seeing none, we will conclude then the public comment portion of the meeting. I would next turn, Kathy, any staff response to petitioner or public comment?
Just a couple comments. There were questions raised about the cul-de-sac. I did want to clarify that there is still a condition, as was recommended by the Plan Commission previously, and the petitioner has responded to that condition by preparing a conceptual plan of how a cul-de-sac can work on the site. The condition allows the gate to remain in place until the full build-out of Amberley, with the intent of keeping construction traffic off of Conway Farms Drive and the full length of Amberley Court. But the conditions will be written in a way that after the entire Amberley Woods development is completed, that the city would have the ability to require the installation of the cul-de-sac. And I will leave it to the city attorney on exactly how that gets written, but we are preserving that opportunity for the city once we see how the traffic flow is handled and how the gate works or doesn't work. Second, I did want to clarify that, as I mentioned, this will need to go to the Building Review Board, assuming it's moved forward by the City Council. It will also have to go to the Historic Preservation Commission. The City Council has indicated general support and acknowledgement that the house as it exists today is probably something that does not lend itself to this development. There may be an opportunity for the property owner, the developer, to offer that house, offer the opportunity to move the house. There may be the opportunity to use some components of the house, either interior or exterior, in parts of the Whole Food building. I think that is all yet to be worked out. But yes, the Historic Preservation Commission will see that request and will forward a recommendation ultimately to the City Council, who will consider the Plan Commission's recommendation, Building Review Board's recommendation, and the Historic Preservation Commission's recommendation. I will ask if our city engineer has any response to the public testimony that you want to add at this point, or you want to wait for questions. And then perhaps the petitioner may have some response as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Petitioner, any additional comments? No, sir. Okay. Final questions from commissioners to either petitioners or staff?
I have one. If I may direct this back to Kathy for a moment, as part of the staff recommendations, the drainage and the stormwater management section of those recommendations, obviously this issue continues to come up. There's a lot of anxiety attached to the development of this parcel in any form or fashion, and the subsequent issues of runoff and stormwater detention. Item number 9 indicates that that the approval requires the documentation to the satisfaction of the city attorney that the necessary easements and rights exist to allow discharge of stormwater at the proposed locations into existing ponds and in the volumes proposed. Would it be appropriate to add an additional component to that statement that says, provided such volumes are deemed acceptable, or maybe that's not the right wordage, but provided such volumes are deemed acceptable and appropriate based on city engineering analysis. And that seems to be almost redundant. We don't allow an approval to exist without that, but because of the anxiety attached to the discussion, maybe that needs to be clarified.
We could certainly clarify that, and I do want to emphasize that before any permits are issued for work on this site, final engineering plans and appropriate documentation will need to be submitted and will need to be reviewed by the city engineer for conformance with not only city regulations, but applicable county regulations as well. So we could certainly reemphasize that as a condition. And again, you do have an additional condition before you that would also address the adjustment of the restrictors for both the Amberley ponds and the Stonebridge ponds.
That's all I have.
Okay. Yeah, what that says, the additional condition of approval would say, and here I'm reading it, that would require reconfiguration of the outlet structures at both the Amberley and Stonebridge ponds to the satisfaction of the city engineer. And I think, frankly, that helped, in addition, Jeff, to your revision, amendment, if you will, I would also strongly suggest that the additional language from Kathy would be added.
read better if it said in conformance with Lake County regulations.
We can certainly make that point. The city engineer's review is based on city regulations and applicable county regulations, so we can certainly add that language.
Okay.
If I may have a question as well. So, from what I'm gathering from the report, that there's a problem that currently exists and has existed for quite some time. So my question is, of the recommendations from the city, and maybe this is a question for the city attorney, is the remediation of that current condition, and this is something that came up last summer, I believe the responsibility of this developer to remediate, or is it the responsibility of this developer to maintain the water controls such that it doesn't exacerbate the problem or minimizes it? I want to get clarity under this, from this perspective of this additional language, as to what the developer's responsibility would be.
As a condition of approval, we are recommending that the restrictors be fixed in both the Amberley ponds and Stonebridge ponds, subject to Stonebridge's approval of the change to their ponds, and whether the developer, this is necessary in order to approve the development, whether the developer pays for this work, whether it's part of the Amberley Woods Master Association, that really will be their matter to determine. But we are saying that it is necessary for those restrictors to be adjusted, certainly at least in the Amberley Pond and ideally in the Stonebridge Pond as well, in order for us to support this development.
To remediate a current condition.
Correct.
So my question for the developer, is that an acceptable provision to you?
Yes.
Okay. No other questions?
Okay. Tim? Okay. I would, with respect to all the conditions, specifically condition number 2, Kathy, you're at the bottom of that, where it says whether or not you can have an entrance to a beverage, a branch bank, pharmacy, coffee or food or beverage. It says provided they are accessible. My thought would be the word insertion of the word only accessible from within the Whole Food store. Is that consistent with what you?
There may be a situation where one of those entities is accessible from within the Whole Food store, but it may also be appropriate to have an exterior entrance. So I think leaving that a bit more flexible may be appropriate and would not be inconsistent with the overall development.
All right, so the word only would kind of contradict this. Okay, thank you. Okay, commission discussion and comment.
I have none.
No.
Tim?
I would like to make a motion that we approve the recommendation for the city council to look at the amended, the amended,
In other words, be accepted.
Development plan.
yeah.
So what you're saying is that the revised site plan be accepted based on the findings that the revised plan satisfies the applicable conditions of approval as detailed above in the staff comments, and recommend to the city council that the condition of approval is be modified in response to the revised site plan as detailed.
Along with the reconfiguration of those other outlets
Correct.
as well.
That gets,
And the modification is
staff
requested by Commissioner Cushman.
Exactly.
Second.
okay, it's been moved and seconded. I would just comment, with respect to the charge of the city council, that we look at this and advise as to whether the conditions have been met or not met. I think the staff report shows conclusively that the conditions that we set forth, we recommended to the council before and that the council adopted, that uniformly the new conditions have been, I mean, the conditions have been satisfied. So I didn't see any exceptions to that, and I think for that reason, I will support the motion.
Shall we vote?
Let's go it. Okay, let's have a roll call on this. Kathy?
Commissioner Henry,
Aye.
Chairman Lay,
Aye.
Commissioner Karas,
Aye.
Commissioner Cushman.
Aye.
Or,
4 ayes, no nos, the ayes have. 4-0. Okay. Okay, I think, why don't we take a 5-minute break, which would get us back here to about 10 minutes to 10 minutes to 8 o'clock.
Glenview. Nervous for that, too. Two
Okay.
sold-out performances.
We will continue on with our agenda for our second item this evening, and that is a public hearing and continued consideration of a request for approval of a tentative plat of subdivision and redevelopment plan for the 10-acre parcel located at the northwest corner of Laurel Avenue and Western Avenue. This property is commonly known as the former Municipal Services Facility. The city of Lake Forest owns it. The contract purchaser is Focus Incorporated. So, Christine Kolb, please proceed.
Wonderful. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Christine Cobb, and on behalf of Focus Development and our design team, I'd like to thank the Plan Commission, city staff, and members of the community for the invitation to present again this evening. These forums have provided the opportunity to hear important feedback from the Commission and the community. We've embraced the opportunity to listen, and our plan has been strengthened at each stage of the conversation. In the months since our first meeting, we've adjusted a number of planning and design elements based on the input we heard during this process. We relocated the parking garage entrances to minimize traffic on Laurel and Franklin, preserved the trees and enhanced the streetscape along Franklin Place, and we've redesigned our initial concept of Franklin Park to something more reflective of the original park with curvilinear paths that we've extended south all the way to Laurel. Based on the feedback from our last meeting, tonight we will present alternate designs for the interior lane and the 4-story building. We'll also revisit traffic and parking in the area. While these changes represent significant movement from where we were originally, we've maintained the key planning strengths in our original plan. We've maintained a significant amount of access and connectivity to activate the site and integrate the development into the community. Every red arrow you see on this site indicates an invitation to the neighborhood to enter and experience the site. Neighbors can continue through the site via any of the public walkways, which are indicated with red dots, and all of which will have dedicated public access easements over them. Yellow and purple arrows indicate the primary and secondary entrances to each building, although most of the residents will park underground and come into the building through the elevator. First floor patios are highlighted around every building in yellow to underscore the opportunity for residents in the buildings to engage and activate the site from the inside out. We've retained another planning strength by providing a mix of residential options. This direction caters to the multiple demand segments in Lake Forest in a balance that hedges against market conditions. The maintenance-free, single-family, and condominium homes will be marketed to move-down buyers and empty nesters at a price of $1.2 million and above for the single families, and the mid-500s to the mid-900s for the condominiums, shown in red. The market rate apartments are between $1,900 and $3,900 per month. If the conventional wisdom that housing should account for approximately 30% of your income is applied, we're talking about apartment residents who are making, on average, a low 6-figure salary. These units are about 500 square feet larger than a typical North Shore apartment development that you're seeing entering the market today. And with luxury finishes like stone countertops, stainless steel appliances, and 9-foot ceilings, we're expecting a renter profile of people that rent by choice. Part-time residents, commuters, established and young professionals, divorcees, seniors, and empty nesters. All of those groups will be a prime target for this apartment product. Our market study endorses the quantity and mix of units and the price points for each of the products. We've received a couple questions about the scale of the apartment and wanted to share some information about why we need approximately 118 units to make this deal work. Financial feasibility is a key piece. To attract project financing, bank and equity partners are looking for investment opportunities that are at a scale that will provide competitive returns. The investor pool is much smaller when the size of the building decreases. Another reason is the ability to provide and operate on-site amenities, like a fitness center or an event room. Smaller developments don't achieve this scale that enables quality amenities to attract quality tenants. Similarly, in order to provide the development with the buildings with staffing, the apartments need to be at a scale that can fund on-site staff and property management, which is integral to the luxury apartment model. And finally, a building scale around 118 units will fund capital reserves at a level that ensures a high standard of upkeep and management throughout the life of the project, which is critical. Let's move on to the new features, alternate designs for the interior lane and the 4-story building. We heard a lot of comments from the community expressing concern about the amount of traffic that would be generated by having a through street connecting Laurel and Franklin. The data from our traffic consultant finds this scenario somewhat unlikely, and we prefer the through lane from a planning and logistical standpoint. However, we did want to provide an alternate design that caps the interior lane with a turnaround instead of exiting onto Franklin and preserves pedestrian access by providing a similar formal promenade that we have on the east side of the site onto Western Avenue. We're still working through the engineering of this option, but we wanted to offer it to the commission and the community as an alternative. Another concern from the March meeting was about the size of the 4-story building, how the height of the building and density of the development would actually feel in the neighborhood. So we studied density, considered opportunities for height conditions, and modeled height to get a sense of the impact to the streetscape. This is a slide we presented at the last Plan Commission meeting. With 172 units proposed over 10.7 acres, our density is just over 16 units per acre. The density is well within the context of the neighborhood, as you find to the north 34.7 units per acre at 1301 Northwestern Avenue and 20.6 units per acre at Crystal Point. And to the south, the Laurels and Laurel Place have a densities of 28.2 and 22.5 units per acre. So density is not the issue here. Let's look at height. We studied several ways to drop the 4-story building to 3 stories while preserving the economics and scale necessary for the building and apartment product. We could go to 3 stories that would extend the building north, either consuming or not consuming the amenity building. We felt that this made the building much too long, and with every building multifamily on site at 3 stories, it didn't achieve the richness that a mix of heights provides and that we originally intended. We also considered going to an L-shaped building and jogging the footprint of the building out into the 140-foot setback at the southeast corner. We found reducing height at the cost of public open space was unacceptable. The one alternative that we found to work was a tiered design, stepping down the wings of the building to 3 stories at either end. This approach maintains the original character of the design, the amount of open space, and softens the height at the end of the buildings. So we modeled this alternative and the proposed 4-story buildings to gauge the impact to the streetscape. We were reminded last month of the drop in grade at Woodland and the concern that 4 stories up the street would appear even more massive from this lower vantage point. So we dropped our building into this shot, and you can just barely see the gable of our 4-story building. The streetscape from this location is not impacted. As you make your way up Western, the view across the street from Wells Fargo reveals more of our building, yet is consistent with the built environment and the streetscape in the area. You can see here where the building has been dropped in. Finally, from the corner on Laurel and Western, you can see how successfully the 140-foot setback is at mitigating the appearance of 4 stories from the streetscape and pedestrian experience. Another thing to note on this image is that the trees that are shown in the park are the trees that are of the size that will be planted on day one. We're investing in mature trees up front so that we have this impact when we open our doors, and that over time, the trees will only grow and shield more of the building. If we turn to look at the building head-on, we can study the contrast between the original design intent of 4 stories and the alternate tiered design, where we drop the end to 3 stories. With the 3-story option, we lose 2 to 4 units, but there's a nice symmetry to the design, and it enables us to maintain 3 stories consistently along Laurel. Again, here's the 4-story and the 3-story condition. From the interior of the site with 4 stories, you can see variation in height between the 3-story apartment building in the background, the 1-story amenity building, and then the 4-story apartment here. If we drop that down, you can see the impact of 3 stories from the interior of the site. Just subtly softens the scale of the 4-story building. Our preference is the 4-story building. But again, this is an option that we're offering the Plan Commission and community tonight. It's a way to say we hear you and we're wanting to work with you. To quickly touch from the interior of the site on the pool, we're proposing a pool as part of the outdoor amenity. When we say pool, we're envisioning a 75-foot, 2-lane lap pool, a minimum depth pool with a dark bottom that will look like an elegant estate pool, as seen here. We wanted to provide some information as to what the pool looked like in the off-season. Here you can see we've covered the pool with wood planks, and provided a couple plantings on top to show that it's not just a stretched tarp over it, and there's some elegance that it preserves to this area. We also wanted to share a no pool scenario where we would move the bocce courts from the north end of the site down here into the pool area and then just extend the great lawn. These are just options in response to questions we heard. And then finally, we turn to parking and traffic. We heard questions from the community about how the development will impact traffic and parking in the area, concerns that the parking is needed by adjacent commercial buildings, and that traffic and parking counts that were captured in December were not necessarily representative of the true conditions, since many people vacation in December. In response to these concerns, we re-examined our proposed parking and took additional parking and traffic counts in March to see if we need to make adjustments. For the condos, we're providing 36 indoor spaces and 6 outdoor spaces for the 18-unit building. For the 24-unit building, we're providing 48 indoor spaces and 8 surface spaces. This is a total of 98 spaces that we're proposing for the condominiums, while only 89 are required. So we are in excess of the code requirements for the condominiums. For the apartments, we're providing 192 indoor parking spaces under both buildings and the amenity. We're also improving the existing 42 spaces on Western that are already there and adding 17 new spaces for a total of 59 improved spaces that are being funded through this development. The question really is, can parking on Western Avenue serve both the district and the development? To answer that question, we'll re-examine the data from our parking study. The original study was done on a Thursday in early December. It took counts between 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. and found that of the 190 spaces in the district, 39%, or 75 spaces, were occupied throughout at a peak period of 1 p.m. So over the course of the entire day, the most occupied hour was about 1 p.m. and only 75 spaces, or 39%, were occupied. After the last meeting and in consultation with the city staff and engineering consultant, we sent KLOA back into the field in March to study demand in spring versus winter. They expanded their scope to cover a weekday and a weekend to understand the patterns, and extended the time to 9 p.m. based on feedback that they should capture any additional parking impacts during the dinner hour. KLOA found exactly the same peak period for the Friday count as the December Thursday count, with a peak period at 1 p.m., 39% or 75 spaces occupied. They found on Saturday that there was a slightly later peak period at 4 p.m., but fewer spaces occupied, only 32%, or 61 spaces. The image on the screen provides data from corresponds to data from the December count. In the area immediately east of our site on Western, these two parking areas, where we're proposing parking for the development and the district, peak occupancy only saw 17 of 42 spaces occupied, 40%, less than half. Under our proposal, we are adding parking to this stretch of Western, so there would be 59 spaces available instead of 42. If 17 is a typical peak occupancy for the community and the commercial users south of the site, and 39 is the code required amount for guests of the apartments, we would still only see 56 of 59 spaces occupied under peak period occupancy for the community and a 100% full guest parking plan. To look at maximum demand, we have to account for peak parking from the community and total guest parking from the development to get a sense of total usage. So you see peak community occupancy in the first line, guest parking in the second line, total occupied spaces. If there's 17 spaces occupied at the peak community demand, and the code is requiring 39 parking spaces, which is a ratio of 0.33 to each unit, then there would be 56 total spaces occupied. It's worthwhile to note that while the city requires guest parking at that ratio of 0.33 per unit, industry standards suggest only 10% of parking is required to be dedicated to guest parking, which in this condition would be 19 spaces. 10% is something that we as developers see across the board and that is realized within the North Shore communities where we've developed and others have developed as a viable amount of parking spaces dedicated to guest parking. So somewhere between 36 total spaces and 56 total spaces is what you're looking at from that range of practical 10% industry standards to 0.33 per unit guest parking that's required by the city. Again, here we're providing 69, which is in excess of both of those numbers. And available spaces, even under these peak conditions at full guest occupancy, 10% or 0.33 per unit, we're still having 3 open spaces or 23 open spaces. We feel that there's considerable parking in the area and that the trade-off of providing additional parking at the expense of green space is not an option that we would like to pursue, nor does it serve the community in the most highest way or the development. So just to finish here, the data shows that the spring counts are consistent with the December counts, and that even under excessive code requirements for guest parking, a strategy that offers a shared solution for parking on Western Avenue would not outstrip the supply of parking in the area and is a smarter option than building additional parking that will go unused. Similarly, KLOA consulted with the city and went back to the field to study traffic conditions at the Woodland, McKinley, and Western intersection to gauge whether there was a perceptible difference between the data they captured in December to the conditions in March. They again extended the counts into the weekend, and they found that the March data largely compared to the December data, confirming their initial finding that there would be no significant impact from this development to the existing traffic conditions in the area. We have KLOA here tonight to answer questions, along with members of our design team. We have additional information to share, but thought we'd stop here to provide ample time for the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Christine, did you have anybody else from your team? Okay. Then I will, before I turn Kathy to you, I would just like to ask whether or not any members of the commission have had any ex parte contacts or conflicts of interest on this matter before us. No. Seeing none, okay, Kathy, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Lay. This petition is back before you for the third time, I believe. First before you for introduction. At your last meeting, you opened the public hearing, and you have plans in front of you and heard from Ms. Cobb some of the responses that have been incorporated into the plan based on the feedback received. Just a reminder, this plan does come to you based on the framework that was established by the development parameters. Those development parameters came from the Plan Commission several years ago, were re-looked at by the Plan Commission. So with respect to density, the opportunity for a 4-story building, the mix of unit types, all of those aspects of the plans do respond directly to those development parameters. The density has been a subject of considerable discussion. I think it is important to note, again, as Ms. Cobb reviewed, that the surrounding developments in this area, many of them are at higher densities than is proposed with this particular development. So from the staff perspective, from the direction we've been given through the development parameters, the density and mix of units, the overall layout does appear to be consistent with the code, consistent with the area, and consistent with the development parameters. Just a few items that I want to call out for the Plan Commission. We did hear from a number of neighbors to the north concerns about the through road from Laurel Avenue to Franklin Place. From a planning perspective, from the perspective of the original development parameters that talked about integrating neighborhoods, the connection of that road seems to make sense from a planning perspective and efficiency perspective, but you've heard from the developer that they feel that the development is viable with a road that terminates rather than connects through to Franklin Place. Really looking for Plan Commission direction on that tonight, and it wouldn't surprise me if there's actually a split of opinion on the Commission with respect to that, but I think hearing from the Commission one way or the other is important to allow the site plan to be finalized. If the road at the direction of the Plan Commission is to be terminated, then we'll need to work with the petitioner's team as well as the city engineer, city police and fire departments to make sure that the termination of that road provides for an appropriate turning radius. So looking for Plan Commission direction on that. You heard a lot of discussion about parking. The development parameters called for all parking requirements, all loading requirements to be met internal to the site. Again, those development parameters were guidelines and established a framework. As we worked through the code requirements for parking, based on what we have today, the plan appears to be short of on-site parking by 38 spaces. That's our current calculation that may be modified as we move forward. It is reasonable to look at that number and realize that one of the opportunities for this development would be to attract people who appreciate the opportunity to walk to the central business district, walk to the train. So some relaxation of those parking requirements could be appropriate. A recommendation for a variance from the parking requirements to allow, and we're recommending in the staff report, a credit of 20 spaces that could be looked at as shared spaces on Western Avenue itself. Western Avenue improvements are planned in conjunction with this development. Western Avenue improvements will be in the public right-of-way and will be supported by the TIF district that's been established by the city council. So they will be ultimately covered by revenues from the TIF district. In looking at parking from the staff perspective, we need to be sensitive to a couple things. That our parking requirements are something that we require of every development. That in the central business district, when parking requirements cannot be met on site, there is the opportunity for payment in lieu of parking. At that north end of the community, there isn't an opportunity for additional public surface parking lots or a future deck, so payment in lieu of parking might not be the best solution in this case. It may be that a variance, again, acknowledging that we don't want to overbuild parking on the site, and recognizing that some shared use, not exclusive use of on-site parking, but some shared use, given that we're increasing the parking on the street in that area, may be appropriate. Currently, the site plan appears to show 6 on-site parking spaces that appear to be workable. There are some additional spaces that were added in the revised plan that probably are not workable, but we do believe that internal to the site, there could be the addition of some parking, and whether those areas are configured in a way that they're hardscape that could be used as flexible space when they're needed for parking, they could be used for that. At other times, they could be used as patios. I think we've seen those types of multi-use areas provided. I think the concern is we don't want to push negative impacts from this property, from this development, out onto the public street. We will see some increased traffic. There used to be additional traffic there when the Municipal Services Building was located, but we want to make sure we're not overtaxing that Western Avenue right-of-way with moving trucks or garbage trucks or excessive parking with many people crossing mid-block. So looking to achieve some type of balance. We are suggesting that of the 38 additional spaces, again, a number that may move around, that 18 additional parking spaces be added somewhere internal to the site, again, perhaps in a multi-use area, and that credit be given to 20 of those spaces for street parking. So I won't belabor that anymore, but that's just the city's, the staff's thought process with respect to that. I will note that, as raised by several neighbors, Laurel Avenue at significant times can be down to a single lane. So we would suggest that parking on the north side of Laurel Avenue not be added, recognizing that that commercial development is going to continue to need to take deliveries, and probably over time, with this development, become increasingly desirable commercial properties. We may see some additional restaurant-type uses, some additional activities. We want to make sure we're not causing greater congestion at that Laurel and Western Avenue intersection. The petitioner, in response to the concerns last time, did additional traffic counts, additional parking counts. I think that you may hear from many residents in the area that the peak activity in that area, particularly with the grill restaurant, is as we get into the summer months. There certainly are times when the majority of those spaces are used, although the parking counts have not necessarily reflected those given the times they were taken. So again, our driving force is to make sure that 3-5 years down the road, the parking issue doesn't become the city's problem, and we're sure that this development accounts for, handles its own parking. An option may be to identify some areas on the site that could be land banked, and the approvals could require a build out of those areas at the discretion of the city if it's determined to be needed, not unlike the cul-de-sac you talked about with the previous petition. With respect to the building height, the 4-story building, you do now have an option in front of you that steps that building down, would result in a loss of 2 to 4 units, as you heard, but would be responsive to some of the comments that we've heard. If the commission is comfortable doing this, moving this forward tonight. You do have conditions recommending that if tentative plat approval is forwarded to the city council, that conditions be attached. This is a development that would go through, as you always see, a tentative phase with the opportunity to do significant refinement, modifications, further review of engineering plans between tentative and final approval. So you do have that opportunity and that recommendation in the staff report before you this evening. With that, I will stop and invite any questions.
Thank you. Time for questions either of petitioner or staff. Who would like to start? Okay.
I have a new question for the petitioner. Do you think that it's a little bit excessive that you have about a football field length of sidewalk starting at Laurel and Western, and that starts at that corner, it meanders and even nears, let's look at sheet A01 would be maybe a good start.
Site plan, okay?
A01 has a very nice
I don't have,
Laurel and Western site plan. That doesn't show the sidewalk very well. There's a lot of trees on that. Do you have one that has a
okay,
sidewalk?
here we go.
There you go.
Perhaps maybe that would do. As you can see there on the corner of Laurel and Western, the sidewalk starts meandering toward the big block building, suggestive of possibly maybe you're going to get a chance to enter it or do something with the building, and actually it takes you away from the street. So if you're walking up to Crystal Point, you've got to kind of sashay over toward the building. But it's only until you get near the end of the building that there is any gesture made for actually entering the building. And I'm kind of curious about the park-like meandering paths and the lack of entry points for these buildings. I just wonder what the
Underground parking.
what the thought is there. Is that
Yeah, absolutely. So originally in our first site plan, which I'm just going to pull up for reference here, you can see somewhat what we had originally proposed, which was a very linear, formal walkway, walkways throughout the site. So straight sidewalks, straight paths, a sidewalk that carried along the traffic as well as one that carried people inside the site. The feedback that we heard was twofold. One, since we're using the replacement of Franklin Park as one way to satisfy the RFP treatment of Franklin Park, we wanted to provide a design that was more reflective of what Franklin Park currently looks like. And Franklin Park currently has a curvilinear sidewalk that meanders through it and around it before it kind of wraps back around and heads back west on Franklin. So we thought that that curvilinear aspect was something that was desirable, changed the feature of the site, made the exterior pieces of the site seem a little bit more inviting and park-like. And as we carried Franklin Park down all the way to Laurel, it seemed appropriate to carry that treatment with it. And we are really providing this as an opportunity to integrate the site with the community and have people enjoy the incredible amount of landscaping and the park-like setting that we're providing. So that's a little bit about why we chose to go with the curvilinear expression and meandering path. It's a park-like experience that's more reflective of Franklin Park today.
okay? Well, thank you.
Yes, of course.
I've got a couple of questions. Were you going to go, Lloyd? Sorry. And it's more of a sort of day in the life questions. So could you walk us through just an average apartment dweller driving in for the day and coming out? And also when they move in, when they move out, garbage delivery, all those sorts of daily functions, and how that would fit for the different types of uses, the apartment as well as the condos, because those will take more traffic, I think.
Sure,
than the single
absolutely.
families.
We'll start with the apartments. As I had mentioned previously, and I think we have don't get too dizzy as I go down to a parking plan. You can see we have a significant underground, fully enclosed, heated garage that serves a resident in the apartments. So ideally, the person is parking there at night, leaving in the morning to go to work. They would leave through the ramp that exits onto Western. This ramp was previously shown off of Franklin. It was relocated to reduce the traffic impacts on Franklin to Western.
And that's the only entrance and exit for the parking structure?
That's correct.
For the apartments.
Right.
So somebody will leave this ramp, head either north or more likely south to the city center. That's if they're driving. We think that there's going to be quite a few commuters here, in which case they would leave through the front door, which I'll scroll back up, and continue south perhaps to the Metro stop in the heart of town, or if they're running out for an errand. Here you go. So we've added some arrows here to indicate primary and secondary access points of the buildings. We've located those relative to the amenity center, which we're providing as an amenity for the renters. The primary,
Which includes?
that will include it'll include a fitness center, so a couple machines, Pilates area, yoga area. We'll include on-site leasing and property management, so we'll have a building engineer there who fixes things if things go wrong. It'll also provide a great room, an event space, changing facilities, and bathrooms to serve per requirement of IDPH, the swimming pool that we're providing, and some nice outdoor patio space as well. So you could host a party there, or you could just kind of grab a cup of coffee as you're waiting for someone. We'll also provide package delivery. So when somebody gets a package from Amazon or a clothing store, the staff there will take it and log it, and it will be there waiting for the residents. The primary entrance for the 3 to 4 story tiered building is right here where the cursor is, close to Western at one of the smaller points, closer points to the street. The secondary entrance point is at the opposite end of the building on the southwest corner. And again, as somebody's a resident here, they're really going to be utilizing the interior vertical system more than anything else to commute between the parking space and their unit. The primary space for the 3-story building is again closest to the amenity, closest to Western, where we predict a lot of activity, and the secondary is off of Franklin. For the condominiums, we have primary spots indicated again closer to Laurel for the 3-story building, and the interior of the site just opposite for the 3-story building. And for the 2-story building, the primary spot is closest to the interior lane, and the secondary spot is off the lawn. All of the spaces have balconies and patios, so there'll be a significant amount of activity and engagement for residents to engage with the amount of green space. Mail would be delivered to each multifamily building, condos and apartments, and stored in lobbies and small mail areas. Packages would be delivered for the apartments to the amenity area, and for the condominiums, they would be delivered by the package area and mail area in each lobby. And garbage for each building, still working on the location. We were previously showing a temporary loading facility on Western where a garbage truck could pull up. The attendant would leave the truck, go down into the garage, go to the carousel area for garbage bins that would be under the chutes in the building, collect the containers, come up the ramp, empty them into the truck, and replace them down in the garage. So they would never be visible on site, but for when they're temporarily leaving the garage to be emptied before they're replaced. It would be a similar treatment for the condominiums, where we'll have garbage pull into a temporary loading area, the attendant leave the garbage truck and go down into the garage, take the bins from the containers down in the garage, empty them, and then replace them back underground. Similarly with loading, we would have moving trucks pull into a designated loading area, and all move-ins and move-outs would occur through the garage. So people would have carts, they'd come up, collect a couple boxes, load up a cart, go down the ramp, up the elevator, and do that as many times as they needed to empty the truck. This is a system that we've employed in other developments, and that's worked very well, including a garbage system that I believe is in effect just south of the site at our prior development.
And then for the single-family residences or the duplexes?
For the single-family residences, we're working with the postmaster for Lake Forest now to determine what the best course of action is for mail delivery. She's informed me that what you're doing more typically now is gangs of mailboxes at the end of the cul-de-sac to make it easier for USPS. That's their preference for new communities. So we'll see how that looks like. Our preference would have been to have them delivered directly to the door, but we've got to work through things. And for garbage, these single-family homes would be the same service that typical single-family homes in Lake Forest enjoy. So you have toters, basically, and then garbage truck would pull out and an attendant would come out and collect them. For packages, we would utilize the loading facilities to allow package courier like USPS or UPS to pull in, deliver the package, and then go back into the car and leave. That's frankly something that was easier about having a completely through street, is that it was very clear you can come in one and just continue out the other end, whereas providing a cul-de-sac option will trigger some additional turning and three-point turns. Workable, but not quite as clean as a through street is.
Okay, so the loading, people moving trucks, what have you, are those two locations that are red and gold, I think, or red and yellow? Or
yes.
green, I'm sorry.
Yes, that's right, green and
And how about
green.
for the apartment building on the north side?
Well, there was two pieces. One, what we would consider more likely is this loading zone.
They'll be on Western?
They'll be on Western since the whole garage is connected underground. We were originally providing some short-term parking where we could have somebody go out and cone a section of the street while loading occurred and then have them leave. But this is the designated loading area that we're providing per code.
Okay. A couple of quick questions. One is bicycles. You've got pedestrian paths. Have you incorporated bicycle trails here at all?
Yeah, I think bikes would be welcome. We're hoping to have the apartments LEED silver, and that triggers a certain amount of on-site bike storage,
Right.
both on the green space as well as interior to the site, interior to the buildings. So yeah, absolutely. I think that would be.
Okay, and my last question for now is involving the cul-de-sac and the ramifications of traffic to Laurel versus Franklin, and what that does to the traffic on Laurel. Has that been studied at all, if you cap that off?
Our KLOA has taken a look preliminarily at it. They didn't think there'd be much of a problem for providing a through street. The reason why we've located the entrance point off of Laurel is because it serves most immediately both the condominiums and the single-family homes heading south to north. It's really only going to serve a limited amount of residents where you'll have the condominiums and the 12 single-family homes. KLOA is here. They could speak more to that if you have additional questions.
I'm good.
Okay, I have a
Thank
question
you. Yes.
pertaining to your estimated timetable and staging of construction by the various housing unit types. What do you expect will go first, second, third?
Sure.
What you're thinking at this point?
What we've anticipated as a phase one includes the entire apartment, so all the underground, the two buildings, and the amenity area, this first two-story condominium building, and one of the two clusters of single-family homes that's further north. So basically, the site is kind of split, if you can see the cursor here, so that it takes all of the buildings and public improvements and green space and landscaping associated with a large majority of the site as a phase one. We think we would be able to obtain financing for the apartments quickly, including a construction loan, and that we shouldn't have any problem launching those. The condominiums will likely have a pre-sale requirement to them, and we haven't been negotiating with lenders just yet, but it's something where once we've sold a handful of units, we would be able to proceed with construction of those buildings. Phase two, similarly, is the second cluster that's further south, and the three-story, 24-unit condominium building, which would again have pre-sale requirements. It would go with the market as the market unfolds and homes are purchased.
So that first phase you mentioned of the apartments, one of the single-family clusters, and that condo building, would that all be built within what, 1 to 2 year period, 2 to 3?
Probably somewhere around 18 to 20 months, so under 2 years.
So, okay, so 1.5 to 2 years.
Correct.
Okay. And then your written, last question, is your written report talks about your preliminary market feasibility study, which I take it is the foundation for the answer you just provided. Have you done a final of that preliminary feasibility study?
We haven't finalized it. We've been waiting to lay out floor plans before we go for a final. We do intend to finalize it, and we think the market in this area is only getting stronger. So we'll probably have it finalized as soon as we're through the approvals period, to the extent that building locations are set, the unit count's set, and we can proceed in the design phases.
Okay. So then, last question, when do you expect then the second single-family cluster and the two-story condo to be?
We were originally pegging full completion for the end of 2017. So our hope is that as soon as we get amount of pre-sales will trigger construction of the first phase of the for-sale product. And as soon as those units are occupied or sold, we'll roll right into the second phase. We'd love to get this done in as tight of a time frame as possible and in a way that preserves the integrity of the site and the demand.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Other questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If I may? I'd like to ask the petitioner, going back to the parking map, to the access to the parking garages for the apartments, there's one entrance and exit, 193 spaces.
That's correct.
Does that...
Let me call up KLOA. They're here. They've reviewed our parking plan, and he's going to have some more technical expertise to lend to that question than I will. Bill Woodward is here with us from KLOA. Here he comes.
Hi, good evening. My name is William Woodward. I'm with KLOA. And I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, there's one entrance and exit to the 193 parking spaces under the apartment buildings.
Correct.
Seems like maybe not enough.
Okay. Well, I mean, not all people are going to be coming in and out of that garage at one time. The development that we're...
Please proceed.
Thank you. The site assignment shows that the vehicles coming in and out will operate well. We did capacity analysis at that intersection, shows that the single lane in, the single lane out will function in conjunction with Western Avenue.
But so you don't envision any congestion as residents try to get out or get in?
Correct, we do not.
Are you at all concerned at the distance you have to travel to get to the apartments that are on Franklin? Getting in or out of the garage? It seems to me that the ones that are farthest to the northwest there would be pretty undesirable spots. Unless there were another way in and out.
Yeah, this is Tim. I'm Tim Anderson, the owner of Focus, and just from an experience standpoint of what we've been able to build in the past. First off, when somebody, in terms of, I understand what you're saying, and maybe desirable, less desirable because it's distance from the entry point. However, the idea of assigning parking places is actually the opposite. We want to put the parking spaces closest to the elevator that that person will use. So when you look at the northern building on Franklin, we have 2 elevators in the dark gray areas. So we're going to group those parking spaces for that person whose apartment is near that elevator bank. And the idea they have to travel farther in their car in an underground garage is really not a deterrent in the market in terms of demand as we've seen. The second thing I'd like to address is we have done garages with 195 and 200 cars with a single ramp entrance. And one of the things we'll do is we'll have 2 garage doors here. And one of the concerns is that in a garage situation, you can have a door get hit by a car and all of a sudden it's disabled. So by having 2 garage doors, we have a separate hose that we can bring out, the engineer can bring out, and we can activate the other garage and create a one-way in and out kind of situation, even if the door is damaged. So there are some concerns about that. We do not have a concern about the queuing up of cars leaving. It's not like an office building where people come at one point in time, and they get out at 5 and they leave at 5. Our experience in condominiums, it's much more staggered in terms of people leaving, particularly in a move-down, empty nester environment, even more so. So we have some experience with garages this side with a single point of entry, and it's been successful.
Okay. How would you add the 33 additional spaces that staff is recommending? Where would they go? Does 193 go to 226?
In terms of, well, we wouldn't be adding any spaces interior in terms of indoor spaces. The amount of parking that we're providing in the apartments meets the code requirement for indoor spaces. It's really becomes a component of the guests, right, or visitors.
Right. You know, it occurs to me that one way to alleviate the parking situation is there's an alternative to increasing the number of parking spaces, and that would be reducing the number of units. Yeah. Has that been considered at all with respect to this?
I think we've tried to address that by there is a threshold of losing the number of units as it relates particularly to the apartment component, which makes that project not as economically feasible. Certainly not to attract institutional capital and the financeability of it.
Is 172 units the absolute minimum that would attract the kind of capital you're talking about?
No, I think what I was trying to address there specifically was the 118-unit apartment building. There is a minimum threshold there, okay, and that's what that's defined as. The rest of the dwelling units would be a function of what we felt fit well on the site and what worked on the site and was a transition from the single family from the west to the east.
Mm-hmm. It's now, it was 118. It's, if we do this modified design, it'd be 114, is that
It'd be
correct?
114 or 116. Potentially, we could make a 2-bedroom into 2 one-bedrooms. We'd have to look at that unit mix a little bit. We're losing 4 large apartments in the ends of the building.
I'll turn to the, if you could explore with me further, what the rationale for the number of apartments. I mean, this is going to be 70% of the units is going to be apartments. Could you maybe go through the rationale for that again?
Just going to put up some of those bullet points so everybody can see kind of how we arrived at this threshold. With the apartments that we've developed, we've found that there's a couple different scales. You see the larger developers downtown, typically at a threshold around 400 units. It's massive, right? And then as you scale back and you look at what's appropriate in a suburban context and what can attract financing in these environments, it's typically between 100 and 150 units, which is what we've developed successfully in the past in suburban communities around Chicago. 118 units or 115 or 116 is at the lower end of that threshold, but it's something that's really a scale that investors are going to look at and understand pretty clearly that they're going to be able to achieve their investment parameters based on this specific property. So that financial feasibility piece is really quite key. Similar with being able to secure construction financing with favorable terms that can support the swift construction and development of the buildings. In addition, as we mentioned before, if you provide a smaller building, you really don't have the rent coming in and the value of the building that would enable you to provide either amenities or on-site management. And those are key pieces to not just providing a luxury product, but really a very successful development, something that's maintained and continuously invested. Also, those rent rolls support capital funds that are a level where if there are repairs to the building that are needed, there's ample resources there to do that.
I guess I'd ask this question of staff then, and the petitioner. Of the other, we're talking about 17.2 units per acre here. There were higher densities in other locations. There were also lower densities in other locations in the downtown area. But are any of them 118 unit apartment complexes?
I can respond to that. Actually, seeing apartments on this site was a primary desire of the city council. Apartments, that product is a gap in what we have available in Lake Forest. So apartments on this site, not specifying the exact number, apartments on the site was a priority requirement for the city council. The city council also recognized that in order to do apartments to the standard that we would like to see them done, there is this threshold that has been described by the petitioner. So there is a need to make sure that the quantity of apartments is enough to support on-site management, continued investment, the type of level of amenities that renters in these types of units would require. So I can clearly state that the city council is very interested in an apartment product because we don't have them.
I take it this will be the largest apartment complex
It will,
in the city.
yes.
I'm kind of wondering what second place is.
Lake Forest has very few apartments. We have some, and it is, again, a gap. It's a request we hear often. It's something we've heard from many different.
Well, and I might add that the strategic plan that the city put together with a citizen advisory group, a city council, so forth, did have that explicitly stated in the plan.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The only thing that I would add to the scale of 118 units is that's precisely why we broke it down into two separate buildings, and we're providing the amenity outside of those buildings so that the scale, number of 118 units doesn't appear from the street to be so massive. It's in different buildings, it's spread across the site.
Okay.
Ms. Cole.
If I may, Mr.
Sure, go
Chairman,
ahead.
just a couple more questions. Turning to the issue of building height, is my understanding from previous meetings is that the roof peak on the four-story building would be 62 feet, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and Market Square Clock Tower is 63 feet?
I believe so, yes, that's what
Okay,
we've seen.
is there, are there any other residential buildings that even approach this height in the downtown area?
There are no residential buildings that approach this particular height. We do have Deer Path condos, again, not this high. The development parameters did speak to allowing a variance from our height standards to ensure that the building had an appropriate roof, wasn't truncated, and certainly adding the mass of a roof does add height to the building.
What is the standard code height for a building?
The standard height limitation is 35 feet in the central business district.
Okay. And then finally, I have a question about the cul-de-sac. The staff report recommends that the circle in the cul-de-sac would have to be widened and otherwise the road adjusted to accommodate traffic. Are you comfortable with that recommendation?
Yes, we've looked at several scenarios. What we're currently showing is, I believe, 45 feet in diameter, a cul-de-sac that's 45 feet in diameter. We've explored other ways to provide that same service in either a square, sort of plaza experience, so you can accommodate 3-point turns, or in a larger circle. And we believe that we can make either of those scenarios work. And again, our preference would be a through street, but.
On that topic, if that was your previous plan or your original plan.
Correct.
It was a through street. If I recall, there was some kind of modification or adaptation that would be made on Franklin. Did I get?
Yes.
Do I recall that correctly? Could you review what those, how that would work or would look?
For the cul-de-sac option?
No, for the through street. If we.
So this is the initial plan that we provided that had a through street from Laurel, connecting Laurel and Franklin. And fortunately, all of the mature trees along Franklin would be preserved in this through street scenario. There's one small newly planted tree that would unfortunately be lost. But the general character, the general character of the streetscape would be completely maintained from the sidewalk over, and the mature trees would be preserved.
Would Franklin have to be widened at all, going to Western, or no?
No, widening Franklin was something that was contemplated in the original design guidelines, as well as adding parking. So our original scenario, you can see Franklin, I believe, is at the same width. But we did introduce parking along Franklin, which we summarily reverted back to maintaining the original streetscape.
Okay, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
I'd like to follow up with a question on the apartments. Based on your experience with other projects that you've constructed and operate, and either observing other similar size projects, looking ahead 5 to 10 years, what might you see as the probability that there would be a conversion of apartments to condos?
Well, I guess I don't have a crystal ball, but what I can say is, to Kathy's point earlier, there is no institutional grade apartment product in Lake Forest, and our market study and current brokers feel that this is going to be highly desirable as apartments. The monthly rents that we're commanding here are large, but within reach, and it's hard to determine whether or not that revenue stream would be what owner of the building would want to walk away from the revenue stream of apartments and go to a condominium conversion. And I'm not sure. Tim, do you have anything to add to that?
I agree. Having gone through 2008, 9, 10, like we all did, I think we don't have a crystal ball, but certainly apartments that have a 9-foot ceiling and have the finishes we have are convertible. There's a conversion possibility. There's no intent here along those lines or blueprint, because we just don't know. But it's happened before, and it could happen again.
Okay, thank you. Other question?
Yeah, I have another question about the, do you think at these price points and the focus groups you've looked at, what's their feedback on the outdoor amenities, like the pool? And do you think those are really assets in this community? Do you think those actually might be somehow potential negatives? I mean, particularly if you're mixing apartments and condominiums, I'm just wondering if having that pool there establishes sort of a backyard look to this, where you have on all of these buildings, the interior rim is all people's front windows, dining rooms, etc., and they're going to be only accessing those for the most part through underground parking and elevators and long hallways. And they're going to be having dinner in these units, which are hoping are going to appreciate over time. And they're going to be looking out while they're having dinner, and there's going to be a bunch of people swimming in a swimming pool. And I'm just wondering if that's actually going to be helping the success of the development. And I'm wondering if maybe those elements, because I've had discussions with developers in town before, and that subject came up, and they just very coolly dismissed it. They thought it was actually a bad idea, that people in this town will probably belong to some kind of clubs, or particularly maybe our upscale health club or things like that, to where they would consider the pool to be an undesirable element. And not that they're snobs, but I'm just wondering if perhaps you should incorporate that building's functions maybe inside the apartment complex. Did you guys have discussions about that and do some studies?
We did. We thought about where to put a pool, or if even to provide a pool, when we were preliminarily laying out the site about a year ago. And the impetus for us locating the pool outdoors is to really keep the building scale down as much as possible. We find that a pool as an amenity is a highly desirable amenity, and we think the character that we're designing the pool with, in terms of it being a very kind of serene estate style pool that's really a lap pool, less of a public pool atmosphere, is something that's going to lend a beautiful feature to the landscape. We did present pool and no pool scenarios because we've heard the concern from this commission and others. We find it highly viable and desirable. And at the same time, we're open to your feedback.
Okay, I think we've exhausted that matter on our agenda. We'll then move now to public testimony.
Thank you.
I would remind people that the public hearing is still open. I have registration slips from 8 individuals, and I would like them, plus anybody else who may wish to testify. Please rise, and I want to swear you in. Okay, do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you're about to give or have previously given is true and correct to the best of your knowledge? Thank you. Okay, we will start with Jim Upsitnik, 971 Verta Lane, Lake Forest, and following Jim will be John Capstick.
I didn't think I'd be the leadoff hitter here, but in just listening to what has been presented this evening, first let me say I'm a 31-year resident of Lake Forest, okay? And I personally have troubles with this whole development. Okay? I said I'm a 31-year resident of Lake Forest, and I'm having trouble with this development. Some of the statistics that they showed for traffic, I can give you an example. Personal experience, went to the grill Saturday night, I had to park a block away, okay? And there's no development on the corner of Western and Laurel, just the grill. So with this increased density, what's going to happen to traffic? I have doubts about their methodology, but that's another matter. I think the traffic situation that's going to occur on Western and Laurel is going to be a mess. I guess the biggest question is, what is the benefit of this development to the citizens of Lake Forest, particularly with the TIF financing? If this is such a good deal, why don't they just buy the land and then develop it? But we have to undergo a TIF for 20-some years for $31 million, so someone come in and develop the land and create more density, more problems, and I don't see the value to it. And I can go through a number of things else, but that's what I feel, to cut to the chase on this whole thing. It may be a done deal from a TIF standpoint, but I think it's inappropriate. The TIF development on the west side by the Sunset Shopping Center, that could benefit everyone in the community. This will not. And I don't see the value to it. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Following Mr. Capstick will be Spencer Isola, or Isola.
Good evening. John Capstick at 1038 Western Avenue. Chairman, many of the points that I wish to bring up this evening have been covered already, in particular the one that you made, which is that we don't seem to have a critical path or a timescale. You prompted a response to that, but there's been several references about traffic to 3 to 5 years, and who knows how long this is actually going to take to develop. There have been references by Focus to the phasing of the development. I live almost next door in Regent Row, which was a well thought out construction, and the developer went bankrupt when 80% of the building had been completed. And then the bank came in and disposed of the remaining houses. There's a long history in Lake Forest of developers starting projects and going bankrupt. The difference here, as has just been mentioned, is that the city is going to be on the hook, is in debt to the tune of $31 million. And if this thing, it's quite clear that the whole project is driven by economics, not aesthetics. The question about, do you have to have this amount of, this number of units, it's all down to possibly fulfilling some missive that the city gave some years ago about why is this type of thing missing in Lake Forest? Because it's Lake Forest. We don't want this sort of thing here. I refer you to, in your summary, the goal is to create a development that over time becomes a notable landmark for the city of Lake Forest. Gentlemen, is this going to be a notable landmark for the city of Lake Forest? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Kathy, is that set up for transparency?
I would ask the audience here to refrain from clapping, hooting, booing, and let's keep this civil this evening. Following Spencer will be Paul Hammond.
All set? Thank you. Okay, very good. Gentlemen, good evening. I'm Spencer Asola, and I live at 1026 Northwestern. I've lived in Lake Forest for a little over 30 years. When I first learned of the immensity of this project, I spoke against the plan because the plan is incompatible with the beautiful houses that are found in Lake Forest. I was critical of a massive 4-story building that with a peak roof is actually 5 stories. I was critical of the design because it looked like it was designed for a modest income community. As I was thinking of this development, I remember driving through Fall River, Massachusetts, and seeing enormous plain buildings that looked abandoned. I believe they were abandoned textile mills. But is that a fair comparison? I said nothing about this at the last meeting. But then, after the last meeting, the thought stayed in my mind, and I Googled abandoned textile mills, Fall River, Massachusetts, and much to my surprise, an entire website came up. Fall River had over 120 textile mills, and over 60 are still standing, abandoned or repurposed. I'd like to show you just 3 pictures of 3 mills that look very similar to the 4-story building that is planned for Lake Forest. But first, let's look at the elevation of the 4-story building. Okay? It has 37 windows from left to right on each floor. If you stand on Western Avenue at the curb facing Market Square, this building reaches from the curb that you are standing on to the Marshall Fields building. And the width of the building will extend out to the middle of the road on each side. And as Mr. Culbertson says, the roof will be up as high as the clock tower. Now, having seen this, let us look at Border City Mill number 2, which was converted into apartments in the 1980s. It has 34 windows from left to right, so maybe it's a little smaller than what is planned. I don't know, maybe it's about the same size. But it also has a tower to dress it up. Let's now look at Seconic Mills number 1, which has been repurposed into the Cloverleaf Office Park and a dance studio. I count only 22 windows or spaces along the side, but the picture doesn't show the entire side of the building, so I don't know if it's bigger or smaller than what is planned for here. And last, let us look at Crescent Mill. It has 32 windows plus a tower across the front, and it's 4 stories with a peak roof. So it looks similar to what is planned for Lake Forest, except that they have a tower. I am showing you these pictures to illustrate that what is planned for Lake Forest is not so different on the outside from these repurposed textile mills. It's not compatible with Lake Forest housing standards and will detract from the beauty and value of our community. I ask you to delete the 4th story on the apartment building, as well as the peak roofs on the 4-story and the 3-story buildings. Then please redesign the elevations to be something Lake Forest can be proud of, and not something that looks like an old textile mill. Today we learned that mature trees will be planted and that will screen the building somewhat. But the leaves fall off the trees, and for half of the year, nothing's going to be screened. I think this development is a bad idea for Lake Forest because there is a good chance that it will go broke. And then all of us will be responsible for paying off the TIF. How many home buyers will want to own property in a development where 69% of the units are for renters who will be moving in and out constantly? Think of all the moving vans on Western Avenue. Just recently I've heard, I don't know if you have heard, the Wilmette Plan Commission voted against plans for 2 developments because of density and height. Gentlemen, if you must build, at least build something worthy of Lake Forest. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Mr. Hammond will be followed by Jan Gibson.
I'm Paul Hammond, 511 Beverly. What is a TIF? Tax increment financing. What is a TIF? Tax increment financing is an indirect tax on all the residents who live in Lake Forest. Let us suppose this proposed development is completed in 3 years. The next 20 years, part of the property tax collected for this property will be diverted. The new residents that move into this proposed development will be using the beach, the library, the schools, along with using city services, county services, police services, fire services, Lake County Forest Preserve services, park services, but those new residents will be only paying for part of these services because some of their tax dollars will be diverted to repaying the TIF bonds. You and I will be subsidizing for some of those services the new residents will be using. If you approve this plan, then you will be committing all the residents of Lake Forest to subsidizing this development. If you approve this plan, then next month, when you receive your tax bill, I know that part of those tax receipts will be diverted to subsidize this project. If I'm subsidizing some city-owned property, then as a Lake Forest resident, I want to keep the property that I'm paying to improve. I want to keep this land as a park. My proposal would give the old municipal building to the Lake Forest Historical Society since they are moving out of their existing facility. The 40-car gravel parking lot currently being used on this site would be kept for the employees of local businesses. The brick garages would be kept for the city of Lake Forest for salt storage and other needs. If you approve this plan, then you will be committing every resident of Lake Forest to subsidizing this project. My estimate is with 8,000 homes in Lake Forest, each will be subsidizing this project on average an amount approaching about $5,000. So you better love this project because you and I, along with every property taxpayer in Lake Forest, will be indirectly subsidizing this project by $5,000 or about $40 million. The city spent $8 million for about 3 acres about 10 years ago. Based on that fact, the 10 acres should be valued at $24 million. When you add the money paid to Tesk Associates, the money for the remediation consultant, the $800,000 paid for the last house on the land a few months ago, the cost of the actual remediation, the city will have almost $30 million invested in this land. I believe that the impact fees for this site should be almost $20 million higher than the city will receive through the tax increment financing district. In conclusion, I and other residents of Lake Forest have invested almost $30 million in this site. Then I, along with my neighbors, want to keep this site as a park. I know that Focus Development is not going to pay the city anywhere near that amount that the residents have invested in the site. I am asking the Plan Commission to reject this plan and maintain my quality of life in Lake Forest that I have enjoyed for the past 56 years. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Following Ms. Gibson will be Linda Van Eckhout. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jan Gibson, 59 East Franklin Place. I own one of the 4 homes bordering the west side of Laurel Western property. I've said this before, but I've basically presented the same talk that I've given since 1999, and that was 16 years ago. No one has gotten this development correct. It still isn't right. We want Lake Forest to look like Lake Forest, not just any other suburb. In this plan, please do not put that through road in. The residents don't want it. Please use the cul-de-sac instead, and actually, I thought it turned out just fine. I have 4 points to make tonight. First, I have a packet of petitions, not only from Ward 3, but also Wards 1, 2, and 4. We will have more signatures for the May 6th BRB meeting, or Building Review Board. Diane Karsis, who's now visiting Cuba, spearheaded this campaign. The signers are concerned about density, traffic and parking, building heights and setbacks. They're against the road access onto Franklin Place, and they want to save Franklin Park, and they don't want the percentage of the rental units at 67%, and the industrial-looking buildings that are unattractive and they're out of Lake Forest's architectural character. Some of these points we know will be more applicable for the BRB, but many relate to the Plan Commission. Please accept all of these signatures at this point in time. More will come. Second, you received a letter today in your packet to save part of the Frank Farwell berm that separates my neighbors, my immediate neighbors, and my homes from the western border of Laurel Western Development. My neighbors and I need to have this part of the berm saved due to aesthetics, noise reduction, especially that, and visual privacy for both the new development and for us. Please consider doing this for our neighborhood. Third, I'm very concerned about how the garbage disposal vehicles and the delivery trucks and so forth, and moving trucks will work. I think they ought to be underground, yet the condo owners are going to be up in arms when they start hearing hydraulics under their windows twice a week and smell the diesel fuel waft through the windows. If we could rebuild the grill right now, we'd probably put all the delivery trucks underground as it is. Fourth, one word, incompatibility. It's incompatible with the neighborhood in all aspects, height and density. Right now, this plan does not fit. Remember that Crystal Point is 35 feet high. It couldn't even get a variance at the time for a gable, thus the flat roofs, because of the city ordinance. Now we have Crystal Point 35 feet high and the proposed apartment complex at 62 feet high, nearly twice the height of Crystal Point. This will dwarf the entire area. You've heard that all today. So it's just so not Lake Forest. Others tonight will address the density issue. Keep in mind that 4 stories plus a gabled roof on the western building makes this in reality 4 stories plus another story, which is 5. There's nothing like this in town in the residential area that you've heard Kathy talk about. These are some genuinely undesirable buildings that are going up. Once again, so not Lake Forest. People also using the interior space will feel as if they're in a fishbowl. And that's the way that park is going to look. People are not going to want to grill down there. They're not going to want to play down there. And so it's a lot of wasted space. After 16 years, we need to get this correct for the neighborhood and for Lake Forest. Force the architect or developer to revise and do it right this time. Please, let's get this right. Thank you.
Following Linda will be Paul Stifler.
Yeah, hi, I'm Linda Van Eckhout, 1230 Northwestern, Crystal Point. Okay, I'm new at this kind of stuff, so I can only relate to this as I know how it's going to affect me. Now, first of all, please, please don't let that access road to Franklin go through. The end of the 1230 building at Crystal Point and 140 Franklin will have headlights all night as you sleep in your beds. And our balconies. When we try to sit on our balconies, there'll be headlights all night. Now, I think it seems to me that there's a lot of variances that Lake Forest is going to allow in this complex. There's the height variance, there's the amount of apartment variances. So what is this, a dumping ground? An experiment? I've heard over and over and over again at these meetings. There was a lady that talked about Market Square being beautiful in 1916 and being beautiful 50 years later and being beautiful now. And I hear the terms, it's so not Lake Forest. It's not what this town is about. Lake Forest wouldn't do that. Well, Lake Forest is a pretty classy place. Do we really need 118 apartments? I have 2 questions. I need to know, is there going to be a city sidewalk running down Western Avenue? I walk the street there and then go to the Jewel. I do my shopping. I walk home. I don't particularly care to have to meander down a path with my groceries. I also would like to know for the new complex what the police and fire access would be. How do they get in and out? I think that's all I need to say, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Stifler, are you still here? Yes. Following him will be Jim Warfield, excuse me.
Good evening, Commissioners, Focus Development, and fellow residents of Lake Forest. I am Paul Stifler and am a condo owner at 105 East Laurel Avenue and have lived there for about a year, having moved here from Highland Park where I lived for 37 years. I'm a board member of the East Laurel Condominium Association and am speaking for the 21 homeowners at 105 East Laurel. Most of the talking has been by our neighbors from Crystal Point. Very little has been said from the Laurel Avenue side. We want to express our extreme concern about several aspects of this development that will negatively impact our building and our neighbors on Laurel. One, the density of the proposed redevelopment project as presented for the northwest corner of Laurel and Western Avenues. And that's still a concern, even after the revelation this evening of so many changes from the last meeting that we didn't have in advance to be prepared to expect to hear. But we are concerned about this project developing a major parking and traffic problem, as has been expressed by others. We are encouraged to hear that the proposed through street from Laurel to Franklin is now being proposed as a cul-de-sac, which will help immensely. However, we are concerned that even the traffic that would remain on from the cul-de-sac will still come out into across from our front yard, and we will have the peace and tranquility that we currently enjoy will be disrupted by the additional cars and the sounds, the lights at night, etc. So we are still not happy, but it's better than a through street. The possibility of building a 118 rental unit in a 4-story building is still unacceptable. As has been said, it is against the building height of the city. It seems unnecessary to put in a building of that height. I'm glad to hear there's thought being given to maybe lowering it to a 3-story. But thinking about lowering it to 3-story versus keeping it at 4 is of concern. We have great concern about the people who will rent in these units. We feel, our thoughts are, they're going to be more transient. They're going to be in the units for a couple years and move out. We don't believe that the people renting in a couple years are going to accumulate 20% for a down payment on a Lake Forest home. We do not think that the renters are going to become enmeshed in Lake Forest and be contributing members to the community. We think it'll just be a stopping point. And again, a lot of traffic, a lot of trucks. And we question if there really is a demand for or a need for more rental units in Lake Forest. We heard tonight, some other city officials have said there is, but we'd like to see it in writing. We'd like to see a study that says there really is, and not there is just to make this development work. The consensus of the condo owners that I am representing still feel, or have felt up till this evening, that the motivation for this project, as it's been presented over and over here, and each time with some modifications, that still the motivation to get this project underway is to maximize profit on the sale of the property, as opposed to building a development that would improve the quality or be what we refer to as Lake Forest. We'd want that block developed to be representative of Lake Forest, what we could be proud of and not be somewhat embarrassed about today and in the future. So I agree on behalf of all the people I represent that the plan as presented has possibilities. It doesn't, but to us, we agree it doesn't look right. And other aspects of particularly the rental units, we're not in favor of. It would have been nice to have this information in advance that we learned about at the opening of the meeting. I think we are entitled to have a written, to see the new revised plan of what really is going to be put forth, not it's either a 3-story or 4-story building. They're considering one or the other. I think we need to see what it is in advance. And if, again, this is getting into a project that we could find acceptable and with the modifications as expressed by others. Thank you.
I'm Jim Warfield. I live at 140 Franklin, and this is my third time that I'm here, and hopefully I will not repeat any of the other comments made at the 2 previous meetings. But again, thank you for this opportunity. I would respectfully ask Focus Development in the future to double-check the parking spaces that are available, and that the private parking on Crystal Point property not be included in those numbers. One of the other items, and it seems to be the sacred tree that exists in front of the old municipal service building, that is really filled with cement. And perhaps it would be wise to determine the longevity of that tree and whether or not there could be some modification to the southwest corner of this site plan and have some alternative uses for that square. My concern seems to be that the charge given to the petitioner by City Council has included a number of restraints that are forcing variances of current code and also forcing the density on the property as proposed. So it seems to me some of those charges given to Focus Development would have to be modified in order to reach a successful site plan. When I came to Lake Forest in the 60s, we celebrated the new annex to Lake Forest High School. But within 5 years, we had to have a bond issue in order to build West Campus. In its 10th year, we had studies to decide whether or not we should keep West Campus or to add construction onto East, which was done at the cost of $32 million. 10 years after that, another addition had to be added to that campus because educational needs changed. 7 years ago, it was deemed important to have retail space on the property that we're talking about, and that no longer is existent. 3 years ago, we had 22 units in Crystal Point on the market. And these past 2 months, we now have units that are going for sale and are selling either the same day or within the week that they are being put on the market. Demographics, political environments, economics, and consumer preferences all converge at a difficult point to be able to predict what is needed. And what is being planned right now is not necessarily going to be what will meet our needs in 2, 3, or 4 years. Mr. Chairman, your comment about adapting the apartments to condominiums in the future seems to be reasonable and flexible. We talk about downsizing, and downsizing is a misnomer. It really is right sizing. Not so much downsizing in terms of square footage, but people are looking for an environment that will suit their needs now and also in the future, particularly those that will be looking at live-in help. So we're not talking about small units. Right now, the most popular on the market are the 3-bedroom or 3-bedroom plus a den in terms of square footage demand right now. So there has to be some flexibility in that design. I am anxious to see what will finally be a result of these deliberations. It is going to be an asset to the community and something that I think will enhance the property values of the condominiums that are surrounding the area. So again, I wish to applaud your efforts, and hopefully we can reach something of satisfaction. Thank you.
Thank you. Others who have not registered or submitted a registration slip who wish to provide testimony. And please, each of you who come up, give us your name and address since we don't have it on a slip.
Members of the Plan Commission, Focus presenters. My name is Richard Wood. I live at 1032 excuse me, Northwestern Avenue, Regents Row. My wife, who was in the audience, and I have lived in Lake Forest, and she won't like me to say this, but we've been here over 100 years total. Over 50 of which have been on either Laurel Avenue or where we live now on Western. So we know the area pretty well. And I basically can echo everything that the other Regents Row owners have said and others. So I'm going to not repeat those. I understand I don't want to repeat, but I want to talk a little bit about traffic and the traffic study. I submitted comments because I was not present at the earlier meeting on the traffic study, and I just don't understand it. It was done on December 3rd initially, early in December, 10th and 11th, and at that point, there were 20 units in Regents Row, 3 of which were occupied because of others who go south for that time of year. But in any event, I drive through that intersection pretty much every day at 7:30 a.m. coming from the gym. And so I am part of the flood that goes to the high school, except I'm taking a left to go to Regents Row and they're lined up. The time when I measured it on March 2nd was that the east-west traffic got 1 minute and 26 seconds, and those going north-south, which would be along Western Avenue, got 18 seconds. About just less than 5 times more time. Measured again today, north-south had gone to 16 seconds, east-west had stayed the same in 1 minute and 26. When the traffic study was done, and I don't know whether, well, let me talk about that a second. When the traffic study was done, they timed the lights 1 minute and 45 seconds each way. Now, clearly, there's not going to be a problem with the north-south traffic, but my guess is there was a considerable problem with the high school traffic. It's also, if you look at the study, it added 8 cars going south on Western Avenue under the viaduct at 7:30 in the morning. The TIF report said 20 students would be added to District 115 or the Sheridan School. So there's a variance there. But the bottom line is that it is very difficult for me, I live on the north side of Regents Row, to get onto Western because of parking in front of Wells Fargo. I just can't see. And Mr. Isola spoke to it, I think, at the last meeting. It's a question of inching out, and holding your breath. And so there will be accidents there. Right now, you can be pretty sure there's not going to be traffic through, but with these additional cars, there will be. So we're really here to talk about density. And a thought that occurred to me and brought me up here was the economic one, that we need 117 rental units. And in my final question, I don't want to appear insensitive, but we know that there's a city requirement for affordable housing. And the question is, if affordable housing were eliminated, what could that number decrease to? And thereby impacting density in the way that we feel it should go, i.e. decreasing it. So I think that's a number that the citizens would like to know if it can be given. Thank
I
you
can
very much.
respond to that. There's 20 units of the 172, so.
20 of the 117,
20,
the rental
yes,
units,
yes.
none of the others. So, so how much are the full-price units subsidizing the others? And
I don't have.
see,
I don't
that's the economics. Can you go to 90 units if there's no affordable housing? And i.e. get rid of the fourth story, which is what we all want at a minimum. That's all I have.
Thank you for your testimony. Others who wish to address the commission? Okay. Yes.
Can I just say one more thing?
Yes, go ahead.
Linda Bannock.
Right.
I just wanted to mention,
The mic.
I have lived in Lake Forest all my life, born and raised here. I love Lake Forest. I love it here. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. I don't like this complex. I don't know if I'd like anything you put there, to be honest with you. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move next to staff response to the public testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Lay. Just a few comments. I will note that in discussions with the Housing Trust, given the number of units proposed on the site, 25 affordable units would be required by our code. The Housing Trust felt that 25 was a higher number than they felt was appropriate, so they did require 20 affordable units to be on site, and that a payment in lieu of the additional 5 units would be made. But the density as a result of those 20, adding the 20 affordable units, the density of the project only increased by 5 units. I believe, I may be off, but I believe 5 units are. The city code does allow a bonus for the full number of affordable units. In this case, the density only changed by 5 units. So I wanted to clarify that point, that it isn't a 20-unit differential. There was a question about what the benefit is to the community from developing this property. And I think early on we reviewed that the city has really been in discussions about the future of this property for 10 or 15 years. As the area around Laurel and Western Avenue has grown up and has changed from what used to be primarily an industrial area with a materials yard, with a service center for cars, a car lot, city services, it really became apparent that industrial uses in that area were not appropriate. The city's 10-acre site today is virtually all impervious, except for the area at the southwest corner, which is a tree, which certainly I'm not going to be the one to suggest to be cut down. But I will say in 2007, 2008, we did have studies done of that tree, and it is true that the base is filled with concrete, but we received studies that said certainly the tree, something could happen to the tree tomorrow. It is protected with lightning protection, but the studies also said that tree could have a very long life. So that's part of the reason why that particular area was preserved as open space, recognizing that that open space, once the tree is gone, can also serve an important open space component on that street. The city council has approved a TIF district. The city council determined that that site, whether Focus is involved or it's residential development or someone different or something different, the city does need to clean up that site. Again, it's been an industrial use for decades. The TIF district will support cleanup of the site. The estimated cost of that cleanup is $3 million, which includes demolition, dealing with some soil remediation, dealing with some uncompacted soil and other aspects of that cleanup. The TIF district will also support upgrades to the adjacent public streets, or upgrades needed to infrastructure in that area. So the city council determined that the TIF district was an appropriate tool. In this case, the majority of that property currently generates no property tax revenue at all. So it is very different than a situation where there already are tax revenues being realized by some districts. No taxing districts are receiving revenues from that property currently. The city council also made the point that establishment of a TIF district does not increase taxes, is not a new tax. So I don't want to get into a long discussion of TIF districts, it's already in place, but I just wanted to provide just kind of that high level of information. I will also note that on the city's website, there is a frequently asked questions document available that speaks directly to TIF and provides some accurate facts with respect to TIF. Those are the items that I wanted to respond to at this point. I don't know if the city engineer has any response, so I'll ask Mr. Strand to provide comments.
I just had a brief clarification on the traffic study because a question was raised regarding the length of the signal cycle at Western and Woodland. I think the gentleman had observed that I believe the timing was 1 minute and 26 seconds in one direction, 18 seconds in another, and the study had it as 1 minute 45 in both directions. KLOA can probably speak more to the detail of this, but I believe the traffic study indicated an overall cycle length of 1 minute and 45 for all directions. And that intersection has detector loops. It's an actuated signal, so the actual timings adjust based on the amount of vehicles that are at that intersection. So that would be the reason for the discrepancy between what he observed and what was in the study.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Christine, time for petitioner rebuttal, if you would like.
I think the only thing that we would like to offer, to the extent that parking is seen as something that we need to revisit, is there's opportunities to provide a land bank parking plan where you would be able to set aside certain triggers that would provide for an agreed upon plan for parking in the future if parking that we're proposing is not provided or is insufficient to meet demand, despite our projections that it is. Besides that, we have information on the pricing of affordable units, if that's helpful. We can revisit any of the other questions that were raised this evening at the commissioner's discretion.
Okay. Any questions?
I have a couple questions. I mean, we can start with
Sure, go ahead.
what are the, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, what are the pricing models for the affordable units, just out of curiosity? Your regular rates run from, what, $1,900 to $3,500 a month? Is that the projected?
$1,900 to $3,900 per month is the typical range. And as I switch back to our part, I got it, Kathy. The affordable, let me just go back to our annex deck so I can give you the exact numbers. Okay. Sorry about that.
Actually, we do have it in the packet. I apologize, but, so the range is from 1,000 to 2,100?
Yes, that's correct. So we're providing 1 and 2 bedroom units per the request of the Lake Forest Housing Trust and City Code, and affordability between the 80% area median income, which is dictated by the county, Lake County, and 120% of area median income. Area median income in Lake County is just over $72,000 per year. So the income ranges that we're serving are, you can see here, $40,500 and $46,300 on the low end at 80%, up to $60,800 and $69,500 at the 120% level. And the rent ranges would be from $1,000 a month, roughly, to $1,700 a month.
Thank you. I don't have any additional questions.
Floyd?
Yeah, I was just reading through some of the correspondence, and one question did strike my fancy. It might sound trivial, but he noted there are no balconies on any of these buildings.
That's actually different, not true anymore. Previously, the elevations that the gentleman had showed were from a design about a month to 6 weeks previous to today. In the packets that we've submitted for tonight's discussion, you can see that on the apartment product, we're providing Juliet balconies and first floor patios in every unit. And that in the condominium product, if I can find a good photo, here we go. We have balconies on the second floor, which are masked here by trees, and third floor. So we'll continue balconies and first floor patios that are accessible balconies for the condominium product, where there'll be Juliet balconies for the apartments.
Okay, thank you. I have one more question, if I may. I heard an interesting question posed by one of the neighbors, and it was regarding some kind of evidence that there really is a shortage of apartment dwellings in the city of Lake Forest. Can staff or the petitioner provide any insight there? Is there any kind of documentation or evidence of a shortage? I hear it asserted often, but
If I may amend
Please,
that
yeah,
question,
please.
what are the availability of apartment units, affordable and otherwise, in areas immediately surrounding Lake Forest?
Sure. Well, there's, to the piece of apartments in Lake Forest, just south of this site is a 12-unit apartment building that's been there for about 25 years or more and is constantly full. And it's an apartment building. It's at a much smaller scale. There's homes that are marketed as rental throughout Lake Forest, but there's no large-scale rental buildings in Lake Forest. The area that captures some data regarding amount of rentals that are provided in the community is the census, and we had pulled those numbers early on. It was a very small percent, I want to say like maybe 10% of rental or renters in Lake Forest. And the availability of rental products surrounding the Lake Forest community, there are larger buildings in Vernon Hills, Winnetka, no, do you know many other buildings?
Highland Park.
Highland Park, some of the...
Highland Park has some, but there's nothing immediately serving Lake Forest. We had a market study that was done that showed that there would be demand, particularly because there's some really good employment bases not very far from here on Route 60 with Granger and CDW and that whole office area. And there is a trend in lifestyle now to rent by choice. We're seeing that in a number of communities, and I think that that's something that was part of the development parameters that we received from the council and the PPL. And I think maybe Kathy can speak a little bit more about the city's experience as it relates to rental availability.
Okay.
Yes?
I don't really have much to add other than what I have said, is that we frequently hear from business owners, people looking to move into Lake Forest, people looking to change their living situation in Lake Forest. We hear from some realtors that the apartment product is one that there is a demand for. And we do have some apartments. They tend to be certainly not the standard of apartments that is being proposed here, but it is something. I don't have any written information that I can give you, but I can tell you that it was identified as a goal of the City Council in redeveloping the site.
Okay. Okay, let's then turn to, if we're finished with commissioner questions, to commission discussion and comment. We have a staff report that I think outlines several of the issues that I think we should weigh in on. Example, cul-de-sac versus a through street, the parking, the surface vehicle areas, density, and traffic, those sorts of issues, along with some staff recommendations of conditions. And I might add that Kathy has given us a two-page handout here that has some revisions with respect to the recommendation regarding parking based on some updated numbers. So
maybe I could lead off just that I consistently have the same issue that again bubbles to the top for me, which is the cycle of no one can answer the feasibility question about what is the need for apartments. The petitioner continues to say that the density that's proposed is to secure financing, and the reason we have that density to secure that financing is to build the amenities that a pool and a common area building, and a pool and a common area building help you rent apartments. They don't help you sell condos or houses. They help you, you see it in the video, and that's why you rent the apartment. The circle comes back again to, we're gonna phase this with a very conservative construction schedule of 18 to 20 months. even in the best case scenario, if you only have a 20% delta on that, we're talking about 2 years to build the first phase. 2 years to build the first phase, then how does that financing work? Financing on the original loan, the construction loan, the loan to make the deal work. On top of the fact that none of us know really what is the deal. We still, to this point, I've made this point several times, no one knows what the deal is. So how can we talk about density? How can we talk about parking? How can we noodle things like 6 feet or 192 spaces? It all seems to me to be a circle that doesn't address the underlying comment, which is the city council has asked us to follow this proposal parameters that were given to the developers in their defense. Here's what we're looking for. We're looking for apartment buildings. Well, the city council is looking for apartment buildings because they own the site. The city owns the site. The city, what used to go there, and I think maybe a lot of the neighbors forget, is that we used to have snow plows and garbage trucks there. And everyone's complaining about a fully improved residential development. It's very hard for me to understand why you would rather have garbage trucks, and we don't. And that takes the circle again one more time around. Why aren't those trucks there anymore? Because years ago, that same city council, different people, same body, thought it was imperative that we build this new facility. The circle keeps going around and around and around, and then we spend hours and hours talking about, does this make sense? Well, we don't have an answer to the feasibility. Who wants these condos? Who wants these apartments? Who is going to make benefit of this deal? First of all, we don't know what the deal is. Secondly, we haven't done the feasibility study because there's no inherent sense for the developers, the petitioners, to spend any more money or do anything else if they don't know that they have a shot at getting a deal done. And we spend a lot of time talking about walkways and meandering and parking spaces. So I, for one, am challenged by the overwhelming process to say, hey, this is a good deal. I don't know what the deal is. And I still don't know what the deal is.
Well, on that point, the Plan Commission's role is not to look at the financial feasibility of the deal. I think what will occur is that the market conditions of demand, as measured by whether or not financing will be obtainable for this, I assume that it is, but the fact of the matter is our role here is to look at planning principles, it's to look at the site plan, it's to look at things related to city planning. The city council received a separate independent study which showed that independently looking at the deal, the proposed deal, the deal has not been set yet. You're saying, what the deal? There is no deal yet, because as a chicken and egg proposition, we need to say whether or not this makes sense, yay or nay, or maybe with modifications. Once that occurs, then final negotiations will occur based on what the Plan Commission recommends, what the City Council then decides, then the final deal, if it's doable, will be done. So I appreciate, Tim, your frustration here, but I think that this Plan Commission, the City Council, went through a very deliberative process and suggested, hey, these are the parameters we'd like to give to a development team. They selected a developer among several. And then we started the process of an exploratory meeting, then the meeting in March, and now tonight. So the question I think we need to focus on here is what makes sense from a planning standpoint. And I think we've got the outline of the issues we face that we should try to, as best we can, come to resolution. I don't think it would take us that much time. The first question is, do we want the through street or not? What do we recommend to the council? That's the first issue. Then we've got parking. We've got other matters that I think once we take votes and come to conclusions on those, then we say, is this a recommendable package to the council for tentative approval. If the answer is yes, we do it. It's still going to come back to us for final approval.
Oh, I mean, I know.
So I think
So if I
that,
may I jump in?
Sure.
As you know, I've had some of this similar frustrations as Tim has. But throughout the conversations, both from the petitioner's perspective and from the community's perspective, I've been looking at the model and just trying to figure out just the priorities of what we're hearing. And my thoughts keep going back to the mass of that big building, of the 4-story building, and how big it is in comparison to the rest of the buildings. That to me then ties into the densities around the apartment units, which I have concerns for. I can't begin, Focus is a great developer, and they've really worked really hard at presenting a great development here. So I can't anticipate whether it's 181 units, it's 118 units, or what is sellable. It just seems to me, as I observe this and as I look at the community and live in the community and experience the traffic in the community, that many units is too much for that part of town. I also look at that mass of that building, and it just strikes me as too high. I took the petitioner through A Day in the Life, and it may have seemed silly, but for me, it helped me put perspective on how people were going to live in this site, drive in, drive out. Commissioner Culbertson talked about one entryway to the parking lot and onto Western Avenue. That's somewhat of a concern to me, but bigger concern is moving trucks, garbage, the day in the life of the people who are going to be living there, as well as the neighbors, with moving trucks on the outside, garbage trucks on Western Avenue on a frequent basis, and all those issues. So from my perspective, those are really the key areas that I have concerns. The TIF issue, we addressed that earlier. That's not anything that City Council has already decided that. The monetary ramifications, I'm not going to presume. I've been at hearings before where we've tried to determine whether developers are going to make a lot of money or no money, and we've seen over the last several years a lot of them have lost a lot of money, even though we were punishing them almost for the possibility that they were going to make huge dollars. I'm concerned about these sort of practical elements to what's going to happen in that area and what's going to happen to the traffic counts, the densities, and whether or not we need all that in the community. So those are my comments.
Okay.
Mr. Commissioner, I also share some of the frustrations, but I would also just mention to everyone involved that TIF has been established. The city has established these guidelines through a very deliberative process, including affordable housing components. So if there are concerns from the local residents about those two things, then they really need to petition the city council for a hearing on whether or not they remain appropriate from your perspective. That said, the developer is trying to come up with a project that fits within those parameters as established. They're doing, I think, a commendable job trying to get there. But to me, the height of the 4-story building, and in fact, maybe the peaks on some of the 3-story buildings, makes this project completely incompatible with what is going on in the adjoining areas of that neighborhood. Those of you who've been to Philadelphia, maybe we need a William Penn rule. No buildings in downtown Philly can peek over the top of William Penn's head. If 35 feet is the height of the adjacent structures, then we need to have a project that reflects that height, and density be damned. And if the economic components can't work because of the lessened density as a result of adhering to that height issue, then you know what? We're going to have to wait, just like we waited on Whole Foods and found somebody else who could figure out a way to skin the cat. So, I'm not prepared to do anything other than, frankly, address the cul-de-sac issue and say, I think it's great that it's terminated, and there is a cul-de-sac and out of Through Street, and I wouldn't recommend that the Through Street ever come back in any form or fashion. But this city is investing ridiculous amounts of cost in this. I'm going to quibble with the $24 million land estimate that I heard earlier today. But to Commissioner Henry's point, we had not just the movement of the city facilities building to another satellite property. That satellite property was the result, the availability of that property was the result of us not being able to roll up the sleeves and figure out how to get Costco down on there. So that costs us every single day that we wake up in this community. So with that cost comes a certain amount of demand for an outstanding project, functioning within the density considerations that we all deem as appropriate. And so I'm not prepared to advance the discussion beyond the cul-de-sac recommendation right now.
Yep. Well, let me just comment on both. I mean, I think from a planning perspective, I think it makes sense and in the abstract to have that as a through street. However, based on the fervent opposition of the neighborhood, I'm willing to go with the cul-de-sac. But I'd like to address the question of density, because I think that we ought to carefully consider the viewpoint that I hold, that the 3-4 step down on the larger apartment building, I think is a major improvement. I really do. From an outward appearance standpoint, it doesn't really change the density that much, but from the appearance standpoint, I've had some recent experience with a similar sort of tiered building, and it really makes a big difference. You wouldn't think so, but it really does. It softens the corners, it takes away appearances of mass. It generally is, in my view, that is supportable. The parking is a different issue that I think we should try to, in addition to the through street versus cul-de-sac, wrestle with tonight. And then, of course, we've got the other issue. Kathy has given us some revisions, but I think I commend Focus, because after the last session, I was really concerned about the doability of this project. But I've seen the responsiveness to the neighborhood, the responsiveness to staff, the responsiveness to at least many of the comments that I provided in an email. I think they have genuinely tried to respond to this community's needs. And I would like to see whether or not we couldn't go through as many, if not all of these issues that we've got this evening and see how far we get. Any further comments of where people stand?
Go ahead.
Because, I mean, just remember, this is tentative approval. And
Mr. Chairman, I will jump in. I'm going to agree with Jeff. I'm just not willing to advance this beyond maybe the consideration of a cul-de-sac versus a through street at this juncture. I think that all financial considerations aside, and they may weigh very heavily on this decision at some point, but if I put them aside, as I'm being instructed to, I do not accept this design. I do not accept this site plan. I think it's too dense. I think there's a better way to create that quote-unquote notable landmark complex in the center of our city. That's where I'm at.
I understand.
I spoke, I think, more vociferously at the last meeting. Tried to give a lot of direction at that meeting, and some of you weren't there. I don't know if you had a chance to catch up on that. Anticipating that we might have a meeting such as this tonight, where we're feeling like it's come around for the third time, and we start to feel, are we obligated to make some kind of a decision to move them forward or continue it, et cetera. Some of my thoughts about tonight's discussion in the last few minutes are heartening to me, because I hear concerns from some of you about environment, the quality of the environment, rather than just the financial aspects, because while those are absolutely crucial for it to get off the ground, it is at the same time, something that is more in the ring with city council. We're not supposed to really be discussing that so much. So I'm going to keep my focus more on the quality of environment, thinking that long-term, 100 years from now, like Market Square has proved so well, if you build something beautiful, it's going to sell, and it's going to be an asset to the community, rather than something that's going to get us out of a jam in the present. I really think that the step-downs on the 4-story building were a spectacular improvement. I also think that maybe the whole thing should be a story lower. I'm worried that we're making this thing into too much of a complex. I kind of pleaded at the last session that I would like to see more street go in here. So obviously, I'm in the camp for Franklin going all the way through. I just can't fathom a community of cul-de-sacs. I just think that that's unhealthy socially. If you can't take the neighbors being across the street from you, I don't know why a street going through or not it doesn't make any sense to me from that standpoint. I would actually like to see some kind of a roadway inside the square, much like we have in Market Square. I think it would help there. I think we might have too much pedestrian on this site. There's almost a contrast in the hurry up, quick, get under the building, because that's how you're going to experience entry, with this vast network on the surface of pedestrians. I would like to be able to see those people, from a quality of life standpoint, that live on the interior of that courtyard have some kind of a front entry presence or a street or something like that, rather than looking into this yard all the time. I love open space, but I don't think introducing a street would kill it. I would like to see a little more work done on it. I think that the big idea of the space is fantastic. I said that at the last meeting. I think that cutting a street through is a good idea because it creates fabric connecting parts of the community. I didn't like the housing on the west at all. That hasn't changed. If you're going to put a street in, I think that the buildings should be oriented and address the street so it becomes a neighborhood. Something that when somebody walks down that street 30 years from now, they can point to a front door and say, I grew up in that house. Here you walk down that street, it's not even a street, really, it's another dead end, and you point to the side of a garage. I don't get that typology there. I think it's really unfortunate. So I would like to see more improvement to it, but I don't want you to go away. I think that there's actually a market for the apartment concept, particularly since the way the economy turned. I think a lot of people that wanted to retire but keep a presence in Lake Forest have changed their idea about owning, say, in Florida and owning in Lake Forest. That maybe at a luxury apartment in Lake Forest is the way to come back and see the kids. And, you know, I think that's actually got some legs. But it is really dense and it is really tall. Maybe you get rid of the amenity, get rid of the clubhouse, and maybe you lower that apartment building or cut it in two or something, but I don't know that, you're losing a lot of space with the amenity in the pool. I don't know if you need it. I don't know. So I'm not sure if I've helped with my deliberations here, so
I guess for my points why they still don't change, I don't think you can separate the financial matters from what the Plan Commission specifically does. The plan works because it has to be financially achievable for the petitioner. It has to be financially achievable for the property seller, anybody who's invested, and I think we way under calculate the total cost of the city of Lake Forest to be the owners of this particular property the way they are now. There's other items involved that we haven't even talked about. So if I do take all the finances aside, the project in Lake Forest, in my opinion, does not work. If you have 100 rental units, you're not going to be able to sell the condos at $900,000. So again, maybe I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth. You won't be able to sell the condos. You don't sell the condos, and we're 4 years into it, the project doesn't work. So maybe they're all related. And I guess I would agree with Guy on the through street and disagree with maybe the other two commissioners that the stress on Laurel Avenue without another alternative, which means Laurel and Western or Laurel and Green Bay, you need to have an alternative to just the traffic flow. I think it's just too much traffic with all of the proposed people the way it stands now. So I would be for the road going through for other reasons than Guy would propose. But I don't see how it works on my point that I've beaten.
What's the pleasure of the commission?
I don't know that we can take any action at this point.
Does that mean continue?
It means more work needs to get done.
I would, if we do that, I would offer a suggestion that we close the public hearing. Is that appropriate, Kathy, or?
If you continue it and are looking for revisions to the site plans, it would not be appropriate to close the public
right.
hearing. I do think, not surprisingly, I did hear a split on what I see as a fundamental issue. I think we do need to provide clear direction on the termination of the road or continuation. I think I've heard maybe
Sure.
a 2 to 4.
Let me ask for a show of hands.
If I may, though,
Sure.
I think to Commissioner Henry's point, I don't even know that you can. Originally, I thought we could at least check that off the to-do list. But if the cul-de-sac issue is as much about the in and outflow of traffic, then that can't be determined until we settle on a density discussion. Because the density of a lessened project might be perfectly
Let me
adequate
ask
to have
this.
two access points.
What's the priority issue that we should provide additional direction to staff and the petitioner?
Height and density.
Yeah, the height, the
Lower
William
density, lower
Penn
height.
rule.
All right, we got 3 that says
Height and
height and
density.
density.
I
Okay,
think the
4.
disposition of the road depends on the overall site design.
Exactly. And that affects parking as well.
Right, exactly. A lot
So
of
I
those
see,
spots go
Open
away.
space.
I see 5 in support of having the density lowered, 5 to 1. The rest of you, the 5, I'll be the 1. And what's the second?
The height. The height
Understood.
should not exceed the adjoining.
Yeah, height and density go together. What about parking?
Those two drive the parking.
Yeah, I think that drives the,
Okay.
As well as the
So
cul-de-sac.
parking is a second.
yeah. Well,
And, because, I mean, the staff, I thought, did a very thorough job in talking about how much, I think the major question to be resolved by petitioner and staff to be brought back to us is this on-site versus Western Avenue parking. Kathy has suggested, I think, a need for 39 additional spaces about, 20 of them being allowed for.
If we're going to lower density, you're not going to need
It
those
may not be an
spaces.
issue. And that may solve moving in and out issues. It may solve trash issues and those sorts of things as well.
Well, you're talking, if you take off the fourth story completely and go,
We might even be talking about different building configurations. I mean, this is, I'm not convinced that we have, that we're just tweaking something here.
no, I don't.
okay. Well, is there a motion?
Or the other alternative is we can motion to not recommend what's been presented to us.
Yeah,
No,
right.
I think we.
Yeah, that's right.
That's an alternative.
Well, that's what we're doing. I mean,
Well, my motion would be to continue and have the developer go and work on an alternative to this based on these comments, as opposed to denying.
With
It's
what,
just a-
with what guidelines?
With the guidelines that the committee has recommended, decreasing the densities, particularly with regard to the apartment units, and decreasing the height of the units. If there's a threshold of some sort, people can recommend it, but I think a general guidance is more appropriate. And then take into consideration the other comments, such as the cul-de-sac, the parking, trash removal, move in and move out, loading as it affects. And with Commissioner Berg's comments as well about creating that sense of neighborhood.
and I might add, Mr. Chairman, 30, what was it, 36 feet, 35 feet is Crystal Point, You know, I have no idea whether there's 8-foot ceilings, 7-foot ceilings. So you know, if they need to be 9-foot ceilings to be marketable units, then the height restriction should reflect that. You know, so we're not trying to get crazy, but
Mr. Chairman?
but I think it's got to be limited to three stories.
So your motion is to continue the matter.
To recommend these changes to the developer and continue the matter.
Seconded.
Is there some input, though, that the
Right.
petitioner would like to make before we make a motion? Sure. Do you want to entertain that, Petitioner?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. My name is David Reefman. I'm an attorney at DLA Piper. I represent the developer and the petitioner here. And I think, you know, we're going to take your comments seriously and go back and look at all of them. But I do think it's important to point out a very fundamental point about the proposal before you. This particular developer, Focus, which many of you know, responded to a specific RFP that the City Council indicated to be its preference for the way that this site should develop. The density, the mix of units, the approach to the property. And the city chose this developer specifically because of this developer's excellent track record delivering a product like this. And this is the product before you because that's the product that Focus is able to deliver and build. The densities are critical and important and part of what the direction and the reason that this particular developer responded. So while I appreciate the discussion going on and certainly we're willing to come back and take another look at things, I do think it's very important to understand the context in which this proposal is being made, the direction that we've been given, the direction the Plan Commission has in evaluating that. A significant change in density is not going to be workable for this proposal. So I think we're open to continuing and reviewing it, but I think it's a very important point, and we would ask you to take that into account when you consider this petition before you.
Why is that? Why is
Because
this?
the specific parameters, which included a 4-story building, was approved by this commission and the city council.
I don't remember a specific recommendation on density.
Go back and look at the guidelines that we recommended to the council in the fall of,
Story, but I don't remember 172 units.
well,
Or 17.2 per acre or anything like that.
Well, and I think it's worth mentioning too that, to your point, Counselor, that we've recognized as a committee that we knew what the parameters were and that there was a formal RFP process, and we're aware of what was submitted to the developers to bid on.
And I'm simply recognizing that the reason Focus is in front of you today and not another developer, another proposal, is that the City Council chose Focus as an entity specifically having a track record to pull off a development like this successfully, financially, good track record, excellent product, well respected in all the communities it's developed, North Shore communities, with similar standards to Lake Forest, and that's why they're here before you tonight, and not someone else, not a single-family developer, not a different developer. They've retained a top architectural firm, top planning firm, to put before you what we believe is a truly excellent proposal, and I don't want to lose sight of that. I understand the concerns and the resistance, but I think we're trying to present that in a way that does incredibly good things. It goes to almost 60% open space on the site. That is an amenity and a jewel of this project that I think needs to be recognized. There is some trade-off for height, but to lose height, you're going to crowd the site in a way that might not be desirable from another perspective. It's those types of trade-offs that this plan represents for all those things. And again, just saying, this is a plan that tries to successfully and does successfully address those issues. I think the recommendations and specific recommendations that are in front of you by staff deal with certain key components that we have to go back and address. It addresses question of parking numbers. It addresses 4 or 5 very specific points in terms of that, and I will call them tweaks because it does maintain the overall project that we've been working on now for probably a year, and before this commission for 3, 4, 5 months with feedback and responding and coming back and coming back. So we try to preserve the fundamental mission we've been given by the City Council, the directive we've been given, try to do it in a manner that's successful, and try to do it in a manner that really has features that wouldn't otherwise be achievable, such as open space, accessibility, proximity to downtown, proximity to transportation, all these things that were the directive we were given.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, as the gentleman was making those good points, and I'm looking at the model, and earlier we were making comments based on the model, some of the scale issue here with the height, if we look at that model, those high pent roofs that are clearly above the ceilings of the top floors really do add a lot to the apparent height. And I'm wondering if maybe the developer might look at this architectural feature in a planning perspective and not necessarily building review board perspective, but perhaps that might impact the effect that the height is having on this. I mean, I know that's model form and the roofs won't seem as high when you're on the ground, but from here it looks like they're almost 30% of the total height of that grouping. And if you were to just take those peaked roofs off, it would go far, I think, to make that model look a lot more appealing. I mentioned in the last meeting that perhaps the 4-story building could feature something like a Georgian mansard type roof, and in that manner lower the eave height down near the windowsill. It might make your units a little smaller, but maybe there's a trade-off there of some sort. I'm just offering that as a positive kind of a consideration. I don't know if it's something you want to work in.
We have a motion and a second. We have a second? Yes, I believe we do.
Yep.
Jim, you seconded?
Sure.
To continue the matter with the suggestions that individual members have expressed here. Okay, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Chair will vote no, because I think we should have tried to tackle this evening. And but the motion does carry 5-1, and this matter will be continued until our next meeting, which I believe is on May 13th. And the public hearing will remain open on this. Okay.
We've got other matters?
Okay.
Some other items.
Yeah, do we have other items?
Now, is there any public testimony on non-agenda items? Seeing none, motion to adjourn is in order.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Okay.
Hey, Mike. I know.
I'm glad I don't have your job.
Well,
Are we going to lose this guy now?
no, part of the problem is that we gave the city council approval mandate for public testimony. On the commission getting cold feet.